My name is George Shaler, and I'm the board president of the Justice Information Resource Network. I'd like to welcome you to the 2025 JIRN Virtual Conference, Facts Matter, Informing Justice Policy in the States and Beyond. I'm very thankful at this point in time that you've all chosen to attend this meeting. I'd like to thank the Bureau of Justice Statistics for their fiscal support of this conference. JIRN is very grateful. Before I turn things over to our first speaker, I'd like to make a couple of quick announcements. If you're not a member of JIRN and you enjoy these types of meetings, I would strongly encourage you to join our fine organization. JIRN is in the early stages of planning its next conference for June of next year. If you'd like to participate in this planning effort, please reach out to JIRN. Lastly, JIRN is planning a silent auction for later this year. If you'd like to help in any way in planning this event, again, please reach out. With this conference, we hope people will find some valuable lessons they can apply to their own projects and will expand their networks during this event. Note that we will be showcasing JIRN member benefits throughout this conference. And again, I'd like to thank BJS for their support of this event. For our first session, we'll be hearing from Kevin Scott, the acting director of BJS. As many of you know, JIRN has a long history working with the Bureau of Justice Statistics. As a funder and a research collaborator, JIRN has worked closely with BJS for over 40 plus years. And with that, I will turn things over to Kevin Scott, acting director of BJS.
All right. So for those of you who I've not had the chance to meet, my name is Kevin Scott. I am the acting director of the Bureau of Justice Statistics. I have served in that role for the last 2 years. I have been at BJS for 8 years in a variety of supervisory and leadership roles. I have been to JIRN conference here and there, but I'm excited to be able to present this year to lead off the conference. I want to talk first kind of at a very high level of what, as we approach the end of our fiscal year here in the next couple of weeks, I want to note that in the past 12 months, BJS has continued to release publications at a pace that I think is very indicative of the past for us. And I want to thank the statisticians at BJS and the editors and the production team and our technology team for getting us all the way through trying to produce these reports, which are the kind of end result of a very long process of data conception or data analysis, conception, design, collection, and reporting. We have so far this year released 33 statistical publications, and that includes 3 what we call just the stats reports. We have released 2 BJS funded reports. We have released 58 data sets to the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data. And as in every year, we're maintaining more than 50 active data collections. We do 13 data collections on an annual basis, and we had 27 data collections in the field in FY 2025. One of the things that, at least from the user experience side, that hopefully people have noticed is that we continue to lean in towards trying to make our data accessible to a variety of audiences, to a variety of media. We produce our reports, we archive our data, but over the past several years, I think as an agency, we've really leaned into kind of allowing people to do their analysis more efficiently and more quickly through a series of data dashboards. And so we have a number of data dashboards that we have developed and that we continue to refresh on a regular basis, an annual basis in most cases. But we're also continuing to release new data dashboards. We recently released new data dashboards on parole and probation, refreshed several other dashboards, and we have at least a couple of other dashboards coming online in the next several weeks. And I'm really excited to be able to kind of meet the need of criminal justice practitioners and policy analysts and data analysts in the criminal justice field by trying to make our data accessible, by not requiring people to be able to download and kind of go through the full process of writing code to be able to do the proper set of analysis on our data sets. And of course, we want to support those people as well because we believe those data assets are incredibly rich. Some real highlights from our perspective in terms of the data collections that we've been doing and what we've been able to release in some of those reports. First, one of the things that we did behind the scenes that kind of is going to bear fruit over the next several months is that we moved our jail establishment survey, what has historically been the annual survey of jails, from a sample survey to a census survey. And I'll talk about the implications of that a little bit on my next slide. We've launched a couple of report series on using the NIBRS estimates. So as you all know, no doubt, there are, continue to kind of be two ways to think about crime in the United States, at least in terms of uniform crime reporting. The FBI still kind of integrates summary data as they try to produce crime totals for the nation, but BJS continues to produce, with technical consultation and involvement with the FBI, a series of estimates across a variety of jurisdictions for a variety of offenses for a rich array of topics kind of across the board, including, as I note here, even for something as familiar as homicide, producing demographic data, data on victim-offender relationship, the type of weapon used in the homicide, and the clearance. And so earlier this year, we released our first of what we hope is an annual series of reports on homicide victimization. And we expect to see a couple of other reports that produce information on a regular basis using those NIBRS estimates. And I think maybe richer and more detailed level than the FBI has been committed to producing recently. And so we hope to kind of fill a gap there, I think a critical gap on our use of crimes reported to law enforcement through a series of reports, and again, through a series of data tools. And we've supported data tools using NIBRS data for some time, and we will continue to do so. We have started to, in some cases, moved some of our publications to a web-first model with some interactivity. The most notable kind of manifestation, I guess, or visual version of this is we've moved our jail inmates series of reports to web-first, which means that the graphs are fully interactive. We still provide data downloads in terms of CSV files for the underlying data for those people who want to use the data for something else. But we think that moving some of these things to a web-first context makes them easier to access. And as I age, being able to read PDFs on my phone or on my iPad or even on my computer screen is getting harder and harder. And so I appreciate, simply from that perspective, the added value of being able to produce things over the web. And one of the other things that we did that I think kind of maybe flew under the radar much earlier this year is that we spent a fair amount of time over a series of years working on data, trying to figure out how many people are incarcerated in the United States who are pregnant, what kind of access to health care do they have while they're pregnant, and what are the outcomes of those pregnancies while incarcerated. And so we were able to collect those data from the prisons across the United States in a supplement to our national prisoner statistics. And earlier this year, released kind of the first national data on pregnancy, as a note, pregnancy prevalence and maternal health in U.S. prisons across the United States. And I think that's hopefully significant information that the field is able to use as we think through how we care for and how we meet the needs of pregnant women in prisons and jails in the United States. So what are we looking forward to? What are the things that, that when I wake up in the morning, what am I excited about? And the answer is obviously going to work with a wonderful set of colleagues, but that doesn't change much from year to year. So some of the things that we do expect to see over the next year or so. First, this year, 2025, is the first year of the full redesigned National Crime Victimization Survey instrument. We spent I think more than 10 years trying to execute the full redesign. We haven't done a full redesign of the instrument in 30 years. So we finally were able, after 2024, which was a year where we had the new instrument and the old instrument in production at the same time, in 2025, we made the full conversion to the new NCVS instrument, and we'll start publishing those data sometime in 2026. The number of things that the new NCVS should help us understand about the crime in the United States and criminal victimization in the United States is myriad. We have, for example, modernized the questions about, for example, around rape and sexual assault. We have begun to ask questions so that we understand when people don't seek the help of victim service providers after they're the victim of a crime. We're going to begin to better understand why they don't seek those services. And I think that can really help the VSP community help our colleagues at the Office for Victims of Crime target their grant making and their programs. And one of the things that I think is probably most exciting to me, at least, about the NCDS is that we have modules on police performance and public safety. So we have data that we'll start to get at the national level to understand how comfortable and how safe people feel in their neighborhoods, and potentially be able to correlate that with people who are victims of crime and people who are not victims of crime. The same thing, we'll have a better understanding of how people assess the performance of law enforcement in their communities, and be able to use those data, I think, to inform policymakers and give them an opportunity to understand how Americans feel about the kind of the public safety apparatus in this country. Second, on my last slide, I noted that we had moved the annual survey of jails to the census of jails, which means that every year we'll be going to every jail in the United States and asking the basic questions about the number of admissions, number of releases, the demography of those admissions and of their stock population. And one of the, I think, really interesting things that will allow us to do very soon is that we will begin to be able to produce, among other things, state-level incarceration rates. We can now, because we have data from the nation's prisons, we understand how many people are in prisons in the United States. We also know how many people are on supervised release because we're conducting censuses of parole and probation agencies. But what we haven't been doing is conducting a census of jails, which means that we haven't been in a position where while we can produce national numbers on the number of people going into and being held and coming out of jails and what, the nature of the demography, whether those people are convicted or unconvicted, and how long those people are staying, we will be able to do those things at the state level going forward. And by aligning our prison survey, our jail survey, and our probation and parole surveys, we'll be able to get a much richer picture of incarceration at the state level across the 50 states. And I'm particularly excited about that because I think we know obviously that incarceration rates in prisons vary significantly from state to state, and we'll begin to add to that picture and better understand things by adding jail data so that we can complete the picture of kind of incarceration in the United States. The third thing I would say that I'm excited about in 2026 is that in early 2025, we administered our first survey of inmates in local jails in more than 20 years. And the survey of inmates in local jails and its companion, the survey of prison inmates, are two, I think, really valuable and very complex and very rich BJS surveys. There are some of the very few surveys where we have the opportunity to talk to the people who are incarcerated and understand their experiences, understand from their perspective, what their opportunities are while incarcerated, understand a lot more about their background, and understand kind of some of the factors that help lead to where they are in their lives. And those are simply things you cannot get reliably from administrative data. And so, I would love to do these surveys every year. They're huge undertakings, so we can't do that. But I'm really excited that we're going to be able to better understand, by talking to the people who are incarcerated in local jails, finally be able to, for the first time in 20 years, understand their experiences, their background, and how they're spending their time while they're incarcerated. And so I look very, very much forward to providing that information to the field, to policymakers, and getting really those rich insights that I think can only come from a survey perspective and really complement our really strong administrative data collections in the corrections space. In terms of kind of what drives BJS, obviously this administration has engaged in a series of executive orders and other executive actions that really have kind of focused very much on the importance of federal data, whether that's the extent to which AI should be a key kind of driver or key tool for the federal government as it kind of considers its options to reduce its burdens on respondents. But also, one thing that, maybe it has not kind of been at the top of the news is that the administration issued an executive order on restoring gold standard science. And from the perspective of that executive order, they talk about, the executive order speaks to what they consider to be gold standard science. And it's that, and I'll spare you reading this, But a lot of these things, the reproducibility, the transparency, the effective communication, and the acknowledgement that negative results are equally important with positive results. Those are all things that BJS and the other federal statistical agencies, I think, have really embraced throughout their time as agencies in the federal government. And so I'm pleased to see this perspective being embraced, particularly focusing on reproducibility and transparency, which are kind of key to what BJS does. This is why we try to provide so much information in our reports. This is why we do, wherever we possibly can, make our data sets publicly accessible. We think that's both accountability to the taxpayer and it's good science, it's good practice to make those data sets available so that people understand the data that we were using, understand the methods that we undertook, and certainly welcome to replicate and identify errors or identify alternative approaches that maybe for BJS would result in cost savings or improved response rates or in other mechanisms of higher quality data, which I think is something we all agree is a positive public good. Right. My last slide is my email address. I used to joke, there used to be another Kevin Scott in DOJ. He was a deputy U.S. Marshal in the Southern District of Florida. He got sick of getting my emails because people would send emails to Kevin.Scott. If there are questions about this or questions about the work of BJS, please email me directly and I'll answer every question that I possibly can. And I will share these slides so that they're available after the presentation.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We really appreciate it. Before I send a question your way, I'd just like to ask people in the chat if you've got any questions. The question that we're posing in the chat is, what data do you wish existed at the national level? And please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can in the next few minutes. Kevin, while people are responding to that question, I just wanted to ask you a question that I have of my own is, how has BJS kind of taken the NIBRS estimation data and kind of synced it, if you will, with the NCVS findings? Because one of the things that we hear, I think you probably hear this all the time, is people say that the NIBRS data is underreporting crime in the states. And so how is that effort taking place at BJS?
So that's an excellent question, and thank you. And obviously, there's no perfect overlap between the NCVS and the UCR, but the idea, obviously, first of all, there's a way to kind of subset both data sets or both data collections to try to get to that piece where they should speak as close as possible as directly to one another. So I think in the interest of transparency, and we haven't always done this with the consistency that we should, but every year when we go through the NCVS and we're seeing what the FBI is producing for their kind of measures of crime, we're trying to make sure that that we understand how the two speak to each other. And of course, the two don't perfectly align. The two typically find slightly different levels. They measure things enough differently that it's hard to make that apples to apples comparison, right? But what we do see, generally speaking, is that they do move together. I think that one of the things that you'll see is you'll find some years where the FBI is saying crime is going down, and you're saying the crime is not going down. And I think that that's a bit of an oversimplification. So we're trying to produce. We did this, I think, with more consistency several years ago, where we produced the Nation's 2 crime measures report on a regular basis. We're trying to bring back kind of that annual comparison. The name is changing a little bit, but we expect going forward, once we have kind of comparable years of data released, and we hope to do that on a shorter turnaround, that we'll be able to speak directly to the question, how does NIBRS data line up with NCVS data? And where are we seeing, what do they say, and where are we seeing differences? And then, of course, that does raise the question of kind of why do those differences exist? And those are questions that I think, as a responsible statistical agency, those are always questions that should be at the front of our mind.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. So we have a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat, and I'm going to pick as many as I can. But the first one that's come up is the revised NCVS, does that track white collar and cybercrime victimization in any way?
Great question. White collar crime is not a crime that kind of fits in the NCVS. We continue to look at ways to both define and then to more accurately measure white collar crime, and those efforts are ongoing. In terms of cybercrime, I suspect the questioner is familiar with the Better Cybercrime Metrics Act, which made it relatively clear that BJS is expected to add questions about cybercrime into the NCVS. Doing that is not straightforward. Nothing is straightforward. So what we're doing is we're testing whether there are, particularly in the supplements, the fraud supplement and the identity theft supplement, where we can improve our measurements, and the supplemental victimization survey, or the stalking supplement, to see if there are places in those surveys that we can better incorporate measures of cybercrime, whether those are crimes committed over the internet or assisted by the internet.
Thank you, Kevin. Here's another one. Is there any effort at BJS to track data through the criminal justice pipeline, from arrest to charging and prosecution, adjudication, and so on?
I'm totally laughing because it's one of my statisticians asking the question, and I think that's great. The answer is yes. This is kind of, to me, this is kind of it's not the white whale of what BJS should be doing, but this is the thing that as we think about the criminal justice system as a system, we should be measuring the impact of the system and of the decisions made by the system.
Agreed.
And so ideally, we're tracking data from crime commission, or at the very least from crime reporting, to investigation and arrest, to the decision to prosecute, to the decision to adjudicate, to the decision about penalty, and kind of understanding the cumulative impact of each of those decisions made in the criminal justice process. It is absolutely something BJS is interested in trying to do, and I think has off and on been interested in trying to do since BJS's inception. We do it very well in the federal system. I think how we handle our federal judicial statistics program is a model for how we would try to do that for state and local crime. The trick then obviously is getting the data and getting the jurisdictions to help share the data, especially in jurisdictions where those data systems exist, but they don't necessarily speak to each other, or where they exist, but their primary purpose is to make sure that people are moved from one building to another, or one place in the criminal justice system to the next. So we're very interested in doing this. It's a lot of work, but we think it's absolutely worthwhile, and we see kind of the promise of improved data collection by criminal justice agencies across the different stages as a way to kind of get into that, to better understand what's going on across the system.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Here's another question. I'm going to kind of modify this question a little bit, but does the Department of Homeland Security have a statistical bureau or unit?
They do, yes.
And so are those data that they are collecting, because they are engaged in some criminal justice research activity, then do those data somehow mesh in any way with data that's being collected by BJS or any other entity within DOJ?
I think we're interested in trying to figure out ways to improve how the data speak to one another. Since the nature of the immigration system is that the immigration system kind of works across DHS and DOJ and back to DHS, because the immigration courts are inside DOJ, for example, and there's a difference between kind of, criminal prosecution for illegal immigration as opposed to identifying people, stopping them at the border and turning them around, or by deporting people who are already in the United States, those kinds of things. I think that's kind of certainly a best case scenario. And we've had kind of ongoing conversations with folks at DHS over the years. We haven't figured out kind of what the discrete statistical product is that might speak to that, but we certainly are interested in not necessarily better tracking people, but better understanding the volume and the impact of the immigration system, and acknowledge that it spreads across at least DOJ and DHS, and trying to figure out what can we do as statistical agencies housed inside those cabinet departments to better understand that. So I do, and it's certainly immigration and immigration enforcement are priorities for this administration. So I think there's a lot of kind of interest in better understanding the nature of that process. And I think there's a lot we can do there. On some of that, I will say stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you. Here's another question about gun crime and non-fatal firearm injury. Is there a go-to source for those kind of data in the country that kind of spans all the states?
So I think I think we're trying to get and produce better information on gun crime. And there have been some, and I defer to some of the experts here, but there have been some improvements to NIBRs that I think will bear fruit in that respect as more law enforcement agencies reporting into NIBRs take advantage of and reliably report in those fields. I think that NIBRs will become a better source of information for gun crime overall. Now, injury, especially if it's not, it's self-inflicted, or there's another kind of nature of the injury that doesn't necessarily involve a crime, it kind of falls outside of criminal justice, which means that, relying on data sources that look at emergency departments that are overseen by the CDC and NCHS, I think will be the data sets that continue to help. And we, as colleagues of those people inside the federal government, inside the federal statistical system, probably can do a better job of trying to bring the data sets together. Last November, we released a report on firearm victimization that I think tried to bring some data sets that we have and some data sets that CDC have together in one place. And I think we certainly can continue to try to do that and not send people to all the different places where the data are collected, try to bring all the data into one place so that people have all that as a repository.
Thank you. So this next question from Charles Shearer is not a area of expertise for myself, but I'll read it. Charles goes to say, I would love to expand the retention data for LEMIS to include potential destinations following separation. Is that something that is likely, or is available right now?
I don't remember. So we have specific questions, and we are certainly have been attentive to the increasing importance of hiring, recruitment, and retention amongst law enforcement agencies. And we've been trying to improve how we track that since we started with the 2020 LEMIS. We're beginning to we're bringing some of that data online. And then I believe we have a version of the LEMIS currently in the field right now. So we're doing a couple things. The first is we're trying to figure out if we can administer LEMIS more frequently. The second is I believe we have a series of questions about natures of separations. I know we have retirement, resignation, and I don't remember the exact question right now in my head, but we do have I don't know that we can necessarily, for example, distinguish another career from another agency. Those categories may not be mutually exclusive, but I would urge you to get in touch with us. We can show you what we have, and we are always happy to take questions or suggestions on how to improve data collections.
Right. I just want to give you a second to pause here, and just remind the audience, if you've got any other questions, please put them in the chat. I've got another one here. Are there data? What's the possibility of getting data on the number of unwilling participants in crime, e.g., people threatened under violence to commit a crime? And also, the person goes on to ask the number of women in prison who killed an abusive spouse. These are somewhat unrelated, but also the number of murders of traffickers by victims of trafficking. So someone who has sought some retribution.
Right. So these, and this is just at a very high level thing about trying to collect some of these data. You think about trying to collect some of these data systematically and at a national level. It's kind of what it means by a person's motivation. First of all, we don't have a discrete list of people who committed crimes. We don't, especially for those people, if the crime was never reported, the crime was never investigated, we don't have the people who committed those crimes. We have no idea how to lead to those people. At the very best, we have the people who are arrested or adjudicated as guilty for committing a crime. And then those are some questions, I think, that may be questions that you could ask of people who are incarcerated. But I don't know how, then you kind of get into, are people able to answer those questions objectively? Was I doing this of my own volition, or was I doing it because I was pressured to do it? Those become very difficult questions, I think, to reliably collect data on, as attractive as they might be.
Yeah. I would also, in addition to asking people to put something in a chat, if you want to ask the question directly, just raise your hand and I will call on you. So, Kevin, thank you so much for these responses. I'm very excited about the revised 2025 NCVS. So you say that that's already in the field right now, right?
Yes. Yes.
And data collection will wrap at the end of this year. Is that the idea, or thereabouts?
Yeah, the NCVS is effectively always in the field.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. So we wind down and we build the data sets. Basically, we build the data sets by year. So we would collect interviews conducted in 2025 would be the accurate characterization of the data set that comes online.
Yeah. And there are still obviously ample questions that were in the old version that are in the new, so that trend questions can be easily tracked across time, right?
Yes and no, right? If the measurement of crime is changing, and we expect by the nature of how you ask the crime, we expect that the overall levels of victimization to change. So I think what we would say here is that do not compare levels across instruments. And this was part of the reason that we did a split sample where we did the old and the new instrument in 2024 at the same time, was we want to at least have some level some idea at the top level of understanding just what is the impact of the instrument on how much crime we're measuring, because that effect is bound to exist. If a question is asked of the same set of people in the same way across the two instruments, then it may be reasonable to argue that you can trend that information across time.
Okay. So here's a question from our colleague Chris Henning in Wisconsin. Are there any data sources out there that track law enforcement officials who have been terminated for some kind of disciplinary reason and end up in another law enforcement agency down the road, whether immediately or after a certain period of time? Is there any tracking system of that, or any data source that you're aware of?
I think, and there's a difference between kind of reliable data and are there tracking sources. And there's a little bit of a difference between those two questions. I would say there are probably not absolutely reliable data. I think that there are efforts, including the National Decertification Index, administered by the National Decertification Index, those kinds of efforts to try to be warehouses where law enforcement agencies indicate the officers that they've decertified. That requires the next agency to check the NDI, for example, to make those work. But what we don't know how many times those are checked. We don't necessarily know if there are agencies that check and they find that a person was dismissed, and then the agency still makes an offer to that person. That becomes very difficult to track at the national level. But I know that those efforts, from an operational perspective, have been ongoing for several years.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kevin. So here's another, here's a question that I love. In fact, some states have started their own state CVS because they didn't feel like the NCVS was giving them a representative sample. So Rose Worth asks, can you provide an update on plans for NCVS data collection with statewide representative samples?
Sure. I think the most direct answer is that obviously, the questioner probably knows, boosted the sample of the NCVS and redesigned the sample of the NCVS starting in 2016 so that we could provide direct estimation of victimization in at least the 22 most populous states. 22. We released two reports. We released one report that has the data, make sure I get my years right, from 2017 to 2019 for those 22 states. We just earlier this year, maybe a month or two ago, released a report that has the direct estimates for 2020 to 2022. So the next kind of 3-year interval, because we're seeing that 3 years worth of data collection at the state level is what we need for each of these states to be able to produce reliable and stable estimates. So we produced that for those 3 years. We're continuing to try to produce those estimates. At the same time, you know, the NCVS is an expensive instrument. It's an expensive survey. And whether or not we will be able to continue to provide state level estimates for the 22 most populous states in perpetuity is ultimately a decision that's made by Congress when it determines our appropriation level. Because we have to be able to afford an NCVS large enough to do that with the direct estimates. The other thing that I will note, and this is, I think, kind of covered at a very high level on some of the BGS web pages, is that those are direct estimation efforts. You know, you talk to those people and you get those estimates. We are looking at kind of statistical techniques that will help us do indirect estimation. You know, small area estimation techniques are something that we've been trying to do research on as our other federal statistical agencies. And we expect to be able to share some of our findings along those lines in the foreseeable future. And that's an alternate path. But, you know, I think the two, both direct and indirect estimation, are complementary paths.
Yeah, that's exciting. Let's see. Any other questions? People, if you want to, here's one. Here's from Aaron Farley. Disabilities reported by prisoners. The last one I know of was the 2021 BJS publication based on 2016 interviews. Is there any update there, Kevin? Any?
Yeah, it is still the case that the last time we conducted the survey of prison inmates was in 2016. We would love to be able to administer the survey of prison inmates again. So this is, again, is the question you have to be able to talk to inmates directly about to get good information. So no new data, at least in terms of prisons coming online. I would want to say, I think we asked about this, in the survey of inmates in local jails that we did earlier this year. So if, again, haven't quite memorized all the BGS instruments, but if we did, then we should be able to report on the outcome in that collection.
Okay, here's a question from David Merriman at the District of Columbia SAC. Does your agency have any plans to take over some of the real-time violent crime tracking work of those like Jeff Asher or the CCJ? I think
there's a way, like, acknowledging that those efforts are ongoing and those efforts are commendable, collectively speaking. One of the things that we're particularly interested in is that the FBI has started to release monthly data. Our intuition is that there may be a path forward where we work with the FBI to take those monthly data and produce national estimates based on those monthly data. That's kind of our thinking in this space, is that, and, you know, all of those efforts are kind of, I don't mean to undermine them by calling them convenient samples, but they are convenient samples. And some of them are so large that you have some faith that they are, at least, if not representative of levels, they are representative of trends at the national level. But I think we're trying to be attuned to measure both levels and trends, acknowledging that different subsets of law enforcement agencies report monthly data, even to the FBI. And so we're thinking through how we can provide more timely data and help the FBI kind of produce statistics or produce data that is something that, you know, is something everybody's kind of comfortable with. So we're certainly trying to do what we can in that space.
Here's a question, Kevin, and I know that I might be putting you on the spot here, but can you say anything about this year's grant-making opportunities that may be in the pipeline? I know that, you know, like, you probably hear this question all the time, especially this year, given that things are been a little pushed out of sequence. But I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call, especially those with who work at Statistical Analysis Centers, that are thinking about this, and what you can,
Yeah.
and if not, any advice for how people could prepare.
I think that it's a lot still remains to be undecided, and I think that I think kind of the last part of your question is probably a good indicator that once the things that come through do come through, it would be reasonable to expect to see them on the postings for those to be on shorter timelines than we have
Shorter
historically
timelines,
been
okay.
able to support. And so I think it's unfortunately, but I think the situation is if I were to prepare, I would be thinking about what my application would look like now, knowing that that window is not going to be open for as long as it historically has. So that, once we kind of clear all the hurdles that we need to clear, then I think that will compress things. And obviously, I'm not ignoring the fact that it is September 17th. So we're 13 days from the end of FY25, but that doesn't foreclose kind of continuing to move forward with solicitations or NOFOs in the near future.
Okay. So let me allow you to boast a little bit about BJS publications, but what publications have really resonated with people? And I guess you'd probably measure that by your Google Analytics or things like that. So what reports are really people being drawn to in the latter part of 2025 here?
I think, and I haven't seen kind of the latest set of analytics reports, but I think that the criminal victimization in the 22 largest states, and we released homicide victimization 2023, which is kind of our first of a series. I think those are kind of, getting some attention, and hopefully people are finding that those are filling a need, I think is the best way to put it. Okay. Obviously, we're continuing to produce the annual numbers across the board for jails, for prisons, for correctional populations. We're still doing the NCVS. So we'll be able to produce some of those reports over the next several months. We have, I think, a lot that I expect to shake loose between now and the end of calendar 2025. That I think will help people understand where the criminal justice system is and what the most current data say.
Any other questions, folks? Raise your hands or type them in the chat. Kevin, one last question that I have or I should say Susan Howley had is, what lessons can you share with state level researchers? In terms of how should data and reports be disseminated in a way that they can be best used by decision makers?
I think it's a great question. And I think if we had cracked that nut, completely, like we had figured out kind of the optimal dissemination strategy, I would take it to the private sector and run with it. Okay. I do think that acknowledging that we have a variety of different audiences and trying to figure out a way to meet all of those audiences where they are and give them what they need is as kind of overwhelming as that sounds. It's kind of thinking about, that's really kind of should be the objective. And, my predecessor or the last kind of director, Alex Vaquero, would say that different people use different data in different ways. And yes, that's exactly, I think, understanding who those different people are, what different data they need, and in what different ways they need it provided is really important to us. And I think that, we have a team, and this is, it's not just the statisticians at BJS, it's the entire agency that have really kind of committed to trying to figure out ways to better disseminate data. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I would be interested to hear from the other people on this call, like, what aren't we doing that you wish we were doing? Obviously, there are data you wish we would all collect, but for the data that we do collect, what's the optimal way for us to share those data so that it's useful to you, so that it might be useful to you to share with policymakers? Obviously, we would like to, every time we produce national data, produce comparable state data, and in some data collections that's possible, in some data collections that's not a realistic possibility. But I think us understanding the needs of the community is as important as us trying to kind of be as agnostic in how we distribute data and findings as we can be.
So I've got one last question, and I would ask people if you have a response to the question that Kevin just kind of rhetorically posed, please go ahead. But here's my last question. So what is the BJS Brain Trust thinking about in terms of like possible future statistical work? I mean, like, if there were more resources out there, what would you how would you use those resources in a way that meets a new need going forward?
If there were more resources, I think back to kind of one of the earlier questions, like for me, if I think the one thing that I would really kind of devote my effort to is trying to better understand the cumulative impact of the criminal justice system by understanding how people move from one stage in that criminal justice process to the next stage. And, once they are done, however they are done in the criminal justice process, how do they go back to living their lives? What is it that we can do that best prepares them? That's, I think, absolutely a legitimate question inside the criminal justice system. So understanding kind of not what does law enforcement do, what do courts do, what do prisons and jails do, but understanding kind of collectively speaking, what is the impact of that on people's, the rest of their lives, and what are those decisions that individual actors in the criminal justice system are making? How do we understand how those decisions accumulate?
Yeah, that would be tremendous. Hey, Kevin, thanks so much for your time. We peppered you with all sorts of questions, and you handled yourself really well. We appreciate it. We appreciate all the work that BJS has done. The rewrite, personally, the rewrite on the NCVS is really exciting to me. It'll be interesting to read the results later next year or 2027, whatever the case may be. And thanks for all you do for BJS, and we really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks to the JIRN members and the members of this conference. And I can't resist shouting out the BJS statisticians and other staff who are on this call.
Definitely.
Like all I do is show up and talk about how great they are, which is a wonderful job. So I want to thank them and want to thank all of you for giving me a chance to talk about that, with the work we do today.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Oh, I'm sorry. We just got one. Well, Chris had his hand up. All right. Anyways, I think he's taking it down. Well, anyways, thank you so much, Kevin, and we'll look forward to kind of hearing more from BJS in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. So as I mentioned, we're going to highlight some of the things that JIRN offers. We're going to lead this off with a look at JIRN's Justice Information Center, our library. You may not be aware that JIRN has an extensive public access online library. We're going to post a short overview to share more information, after which we'll have a break. So anyways, Jason, if you could run our library commercial, that'd be great.
Welcome to the Justice Information Center, or JIC, your gateway to the research and evaluation work of JIRN's staff, members, and partners. The JIC also aggregates other open access and public domain research-based materials. Its contents are drawn from the national, state, and local levels, covering a range of crime and justice topics. The JIC is a searchable database that organizes its resources into 6 broad communities and 17 specialized collections, making it easy for users to explore research and reports by topic, source, or area of focus. This growing database contains nearly 5,000 resources. The built-in filters allow users to refine their search results to match their specific preferences. One of our most significant collections features publications from the Statistical Analysis Centers, which analyze and share essential crime and justice data. Their research guides decision-making at every level of government, informing local community initiatives, shaping state programs, and supporting national strategies. Currently, this collection has over 2,000 publications. It is updated monthly, so check back often for the latest Statistical Analysis Center publications. Visit the Justice Information Center to view the work of JIRN and our members.
Thank you, everyone, for coming back from break. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Haas, Vice President of JIRN. So, Stephen, take it away.
Hi, thanks, George. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. And welcome to today's panel. Today's panel is called Bridging Public Health and Public Safety Through Deflection. As George said, my name is Stephen Haas. I'm going to serve as the moderator today. And we're thrilled to bring together three experts who highlight innovative deflection strategies and in order to help divert individuals with behavioral health needs away from the system. Our speakers bring a great deal of research, evaluation, and policy implementation experience across two different states. Today we plan to begin with a few introductions. We'll also have an opportunity for question and answers, and we'll reserve most of those questions till the end of all the three presentations. However, if there are some burning questions in between, we may entertain those as well. You can include your comments and questions as well in the chat, and I will do my best to try to monitor those as well. So feel free to put some comments there as well. So today, as I mentioned, we have three different panelists. We have Sarah Manchak and Kimberly Sperber from Ohio who will be presenting. And we have Kelly Officer from Oregon who will be presenting some of her work that's taking place in Oregon. Before we get too much further, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lisa Schoaf to let her introduce two of her peers and colleagues in Ohio who will be presenting first, and I will circle back and provide an introduction for Kelly.
Thanks, Stephen. Hello, everyone. My name's Lisa Schoaf, and I'm the SAC Director for Ohio. Our presenters today are also from Ohio, and they will be speaking about evaluations of some of Ohio's quick response teams that were funded through the BJA Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Use Program grant, otherwise known as COSUP. Ohio has received two COSUP grants thus far, one in 2020 that has since ended, and our current one that was awarded in 2023. These are three-year grants. Dr. Kim Sperber and Dr. Sarah Manchak led the evaluation team for the prior grant, and they also lead the evaluation for the current grant. Dr. Sperber is the director of the Center for Health and Human Services Research at Talbot House, which is a community-based nonprofit agency in the greater Cincinnati area that focuses on substance use, mental health, and community corrections. She oversees and conducts research in corrections, mental health, addictions, and primary care for the center. Dr. Manchak is an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati School of Criminal Justice, where she serves as the undergraduate program director. Her research seeks to inform policy and interventions for offenders and individuals with serious mental illness and/or addiction. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sperber and Dr. Manchak to tell you about their evaluation work. So Kim and Sarah, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for having us here. Sarah, I think you're going to actually kick us off if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. Thanks for having us join you today. And I'm just going to start with just a very, very brief introduction to Kim and I, why we're here, what our background is about, and kind of the state of the issue of evaluating deflection programs. So just to give you a little bit of background, Kim and I have been in this space for quite some time now. And we have both independently engaged in a number of evaluations of deflection programs in Ohio, and then together, along with one of our colleagues, Dr. Corey Haberman at UC, and then Kim's other colleagues at Talbot House, have been involved in these statewide COSAP grants as well. And so those are going to be kind of the focus of our conversation today. But our other evaluation projects have definitely informed our work as well. So just to kind of give you a sense of what those COSAP programs or the evaluations look like, They were statewide, so they were multi-site. It was a multi-site. They both are multi-site evaluations. The one now is actually much larger than the one that we had previously, with more sites that we're evaluating. But this is just to kind of give you a sense of where folks are located, where these different programs are occurring. You can see that by and large, they're pretty much law enforcement led programs. So they're housed usually within the sheriff's office or certain task force that are affiliated with local police. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background about current evidence base in support of deflection. So deflection now has been around for over a decade. And in this time, as much as we have tried to build an evidence base along with other researchers in this space, we do see some mixed findings, but we see some positive findings as well. So one of the reasons we're seeing mixed findings is kind of the core of our conversation today, and we're going to kind of go into why we're seeing that and then provide some recommendations that can help build this evidence base better going forward. But just generally speaking, we do see some positive findings across a number of domains for the deflection work that's being done in Ohio and elsewhere. So in terms of public safety domains, we do see decreased arrests, decreased jail time. In terms of stigma, we have seen that there's been decreased stigma, especially among law enforcement officers toward individuals who use substances. In the public health domain, we are seeing decreases in overdoses, which is really, really encouraging, of course, and increased involvement in treatment and retention in treatment. And then also more recently, we've been able to see that there's some benefits in terms of cost in both criminal justice and the public health fields, where there's decreased expenditures in both of those areas. So as I alluded to, the evidence base for deflection is still building, and that's because it's faced a number of really important challenges that probably I think are maybe not completely unique to other settings and contexts, but they have been thus far evasive and hard for us to overcome at this point. The first one is that there's really heterogeneous implementation across sites. So the kind of running commentary is that if you've seen one deflection program, you've seen one deflection program. Every site does things a little bit differently. The different activities that they do in the site, how they do it is different. And even the outcomes that they're focused on is different across sites. So it makes it really hard to look at trends, right? Because we end up comparing apples to oranges to bananas sometimes. So it can be kind of challenging. Another issue that we've come across is that they're really, across these sites, there are no standardized outcomes and definitions of those outcomes. So, one site may look at arrest outcomes or overdose outcomes. Some sites may look at overdose rates in the county. Other sites may look at linkage to treatment. And then that can look at different in different sites. So if you take something like linkage to treatment, well, what does that mean? That means something different for one location than it does in another, and treatment can be defined as something different everywhere. So that's been a real challenge for us researchers as we're trying to do, especially like these multi-site evaluations. And then finally, a lot of these programs, deflection programs, are embedded in locales where there's multiple things also happening at the same time to address the overdose crisis. And so it's really hard to tease apart the unique effects of the deflection program when so much else is happening in the same space. And as researchers, we know that we're working with agencies who, up until this point, and I think going forward, I haven't seen things move in the direction of change in this area. The sites that are doing deflection work really are sustained by grant funding. And in order to write new grants and get those grants, they do need to demonstrate that they're doing things that work or that are promising. And so they really do need to partner with researchers to be able to do that. So our role, the way that we see our role, is both in trying to identify best practices and identify the evidence behind the work that these deflection teams are doing, as well as really try to advocate for them to develop an infrastructure that will allow for them to be successful based off of what we know about successful programs in other contexts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and she's going to talk about some of the evidence that we have so far and some recommendations.
Thanks, Sarah. So Sarah alluded to, what we're trying to help do is basically fast track some of the evidence-based and infrastructure development so it doesn't take as long as we've seen it take in other areas. So for example, I come out of the correctional treatment world, and it probably took us at least 3 decades to get to a point where we really had a solid set of metrics and indicators and practices that we know really well. That's what we should be doing in programs to produce an effect. And so rather than wait till we get all the evidence in and then make a statement about how and whether deflection teams work, we're looking at what are their discrete strategies that they use that already have evidence behind them so they can at least cite those things. Probably the primary one is naloxone distribution. So we do have some really good studies showing that when we do naloxone distribution at a sufficient rate, and right, you've got to get enough of it out into communities, we do in fact reduce death rates at a community level or at a macro level, which is really important to understand because there is still some ongoing debate as to whether deflection teams should be held accountable for overdose death rates, given that's macro, and much of their interactions with individuals are obviously micro level interventions. But if they're doing widespread naloxone distribution, that is something they can point to with evidence. So we do have, the Wally et al. Study was probably one of the first ones to come out that people might be familiar with already, where they looked at implementation of opioid overdose education and naloxone distribution programs and found that where there was a high level of implementation, meaning at least 100 kits distributed per 100,000 folks, that they did see substantial drops in fatal overdoses within those communities. And then similarly, the North Carolina one, the third bullet point, they found, again, pretty much the same finding that, again, when it was at least 100 kits per 100,000, they were showing a 12% lower mortality rate from opioid overdoses. And then the McClellan study actually was looking at the implementation of specific laws related to naloxone access and Good Samaritan laws, finding that states that have those laws in place demonstrated reductions in overdose deaths relative to states that did not implement such laws. So that's something that we can provide them with evidence to be able to cite as one of the strategies that they use that's evidence-based. Another strategy that most of the teams use, if not all, is direct transport to treatment. So obviously, treatment is the vehicle, is the primary thing that's going to get people to recovery and stay in recovery, but they need to be able to get there. And so these deflection teams are the ones that are going out in the field, finding people and trying to physically transport them there. We don't have a lot of research yet in this space, but we do have research to show that longer transit times are associated with increases in risk for overdose and missed appointments. And we do at least have a couple studies where they have found that, for example, in the first one, that was a meta-analysis done on a handful of studies, I think about 12, but they did find that providing treatment did reduce missed appointments, and that was across treatment type, it was across population type and across transportation type in that particular one. The Friedman study also found that it improved treatment retention, and that one was actually specific to substance use treatment. They did interestingly find, though, that bus passes did not have that effect, but all other types of direct transportation did. And that's not necessarily surprising because there's a lot of barriers that come with using public transportation versus just getting a direct ride to the site. So we do have some data that these teams can start to support that particular strategy that they are using for those warm handoffs. And then we are seeing more and more teams add peer supporters to their networks. That was not as common when we were in this space, probably starting 6 or 7 years ago. It is very common now for teams to have peer supporters on their teams. There's a lot more research in that space related to peer support. Most of it is not specific to peer support within a deflection team per se, although I do believe a randomized control trial on that did just finish up and will likely be published soon. But we do see a range of positive outcomes related to implementing peer support, whether that's treatment engagement, increasing hope among participants, increasing self-efficacy, and in the outcome space, reducing substance use, recurrent use, risk behaviors associated with HIV and hepatitis C, and reductions in the need for emergency service use. So that is another strategy that they can cite as being evidence-based. In terms of the infrastructure that Sarah mentioned, we have a lot of research that already exists within implementation science and then also within other sectors, to include the peer support research as well as correctional treatment research, that we already know that there are some things that are from an infrastructure standpoint, which is a little bit different than the intervention itself, that agencies should be doing in order to produce positive outcomes, and that these infrastructural things are directly associated by themselves to those outcomes in many studies. The nice thing is with all the interviews and things that we've done through both the COSEP grants with our needs assessment processes, as well as the other studies we've done that are qualitative in nature, we are hearing that more and more of these things are in place. Some of them have been in place for quite some time. Things like committed leadership and mission alignment have been strong from the beginning. Clear governance structures is getting stronger for a lot of teams through standard operating procedures and trainings and things like that. Recruitment, making sure that you're recruiting staff who have the values that are consistent with the work is really critical to having positive outcome in this space. Staff training. So this is an area that still has a lot of development, I think, for deflection. We don't really have a standardized training protocol that exists for deflection teams because we don't yet know exactly what that training should consist of. But in other spaces, making sure new staff are trained in evidence-based practice specific to their work is critical and been shown to improve outcomes, as are things like meeting with staff routinely and having ongoing coaching and supervision for those staff. Fidelity monitoring, understanding that you are watching for the core ingredients of your intervention. Again, I think a lot of work that still needs to be done here because we don't yet know exactly what those core ingredients are at that level, but there's still research ongoing there as well. Making sure there are data systems to do the things that Sarah alluded to in terms of making sure that we are capturing the right kinds of metrics. We're doing it in a standardized way. We can report out on those. We can analyze those for quality improvement, because research has shown in other domains that doing formalized quality improvement within an organization also has a direct association with that organization's outcomes. And then, as we've been alluding to all along, the funding and sustainability piece are critical for programs to maintain a positive outcome. So when we meet with our teams, you'll see here in a minute, when we do recommendations based off our needs assessments, a lot of them will align back with those things that we just talked about. The other thing we've been doing in both COSEP projects is integrating the PMAT, if you're familiar with that. So that's the Project Management Adherence Tool. And we use it in two ways in our evaluations. One is as a quality improvement mechanism for the grantees. The other is that we integrate it into our process evaluation. But this is a process that was developed through Operation to Save Lives and QRT, and is now administered under Core Data, where the grantees each fill out an online survey. It's fairly extensive. That is then reviewed by Dan Malloy and his team, who are experts in this space. They then meet with each of those sites and then do more follow-up and in-depth kind of interview process to clarify things and get additional information. And from that, they're able to produce a report that gives that team back both their strengths and their opportunities for improvement in core domains, such as infrastructure and operations, community alignment in terms of how their services align with the needs of that particular community, what kind of partnerships they have in place, sustainability plans, learning and improvement, and what their program outcomes are and what they're tracking and how they track, for example. Each of those domains are scored, and they also get an overall score, and that kind of helps them understand where they're at in that trajectory for program maturity. Also gives us the ability to kind of compare that across teams in a standardized way. And most importantly, its true intent is to be used for quality improvement. So that's been integrated into both of our COSEP grants for those grantees. So when we meet with them, part of the evaluation that we've done includes a needs assessment. And so what we do is we again, it's a combination of an online survey and in-depth interviews. We take stuff from the PMAT, we take their community data, and then we put it up against implementation science data, and we come back and say, here's kind of some recommendations for your team. And so we won't go into these in detail for time, but you'll see that these, again, they're all infrastructural. They're not really about the interventions themselves per se. So it's making sure that we have releases of information so we can track folks for that data component. Making sure we have data sharing agreements in place where needed, because that has been a barrier for some teams that they don't get the data they need in a timely way. Making sure we have MOUs that are established and updated, and they're not just with our internal team partners but with external community partners, and that it's formalized, because what happens is we do these handshake agreements and then there's staff turnover and then we have to start all over again, rather than having these formal agreements. Having common outcomes, really important that we're taking a look at how we deal with compassion fatigue and secondary trauma for these first responders. So there's some recommendations in that space as well. And then this has been a big focus in both grant cycles, is making sure that we've got really well-developed standard operating procedure manuals that go beyond, because to say, what we probably should have led with is most of our teams that we're working with are law enforcement led. And so sometimes they'll have SOPs, but they're more general to law enforcement activities more generally and not specific to a quick response team or deflection team. So we do recommend that they build out their SOP specific to the deflection work. We've got some recommendations this time around based on the grantees we have about collaboration with hospitals and EMS to further diversify their pool of folks that they might be able to reach, particularly through hospitals. We've seen that teams that do that have had some pretty decent success there. And then making sure that they're providing ongoing training and updating their overdose prevention practices as we get new evidence that comes out in that space. And then supplementing their deflection-specific education for other law enforcement entities that may not be directly on the team, but are interacting with the team and might serve as a referral source for that team. And then finally, we've got things related to strengthening the mental health response, because most of these teams are not necessarily trained in mental health crisis responses. So we've got some recommendations there. Securing grant writing technical assistance, because again, more and more grant mechanisms are requiring people to really be able to demonstrate the evidence behind what they do. And so there's a skill in doing that. And so we are working with them. We do have a technical assistance arm within our current COSA project to be able to do that kind of technical assistance work with the grantees. And then obviously, if we're going to have a PMAT report for QI purposes, then we have a standardized recommendation that they actually use that data and they can show that back to the team by the end of the grant cycle that they've done something with that information to make improvements. So I know that's kind of a high level and very quick due to time, but I think it's a good way to look at, we're doing the traditional outcome work, which, and process evaluation work and all the quantitative, measurement stuff. But at the same time, we are trying to build in these other resources for teams to help kind of move our teams and the field as a whole forward and maybe in a bit of a faster way, given some of the challenges that we are experiencing about developing an evidence base for this particular intervention. And then, Stephen, I think you said we would do this at the very end.
Yeah, sure. I mean, thanks for that presentation, Sarah and Kim. We do have just a moment. We could entertain a question or two now if there's some burning questions that somebody wants to ask. And you can put them in the chat as well. If we don't get any, we'll move on to our next presentation. Okay, seeing no burning questions at this time, we're going to move on to our next presentation. We have Kelly Officer. She's the research director for the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, and she has been a SAC director for many years and has been a very active participant in JIRN and JRSA before that. Kelly's going to present results on Oregon's statewide behavioral health deflection program, which was just launched in 2024. And she's going to speak to some of the referral patterns, the use of a data collection system, and lessons that they've learned at the county level in particular around implementation. And she will probably point to some key issues around some variations in programming, staff challenges possibly, and so forth. So Kelly, why don't you take it over and share your information?
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, we'll see. Sharing the slides might be the hardest part. And actually,
Always is.
I'll try to remember too. I'm seeing some similarities with what Ohio presented, maybe just using slightly different words. So I think we'll see some. Oh, thank you, George. Thank you. We shall see some common themes here from two different states working to evaluate and implement deflection programs. Oh,
George is bragging on you a little bit, says you're a distinguished former JIRN executive committee member as well. So been
thank you.
very active.
Well, it's great. It's great to be here and great to see everybody. And no shortage of work in Oregon. And our latest adventure is a behavioral health deflection program. So I'll kind of jump into an overview of what's happening in Oregon. So before we get to the deflection programs, I wanted to give a little bit of background on some of the key criminal law changes that motivated implementing these programs by our state legislature. So a hot question in Oregon and probably other places too is what is the appropriate criminal law level for possession of controlled substances or PCS offenses, right? Drug possessions. Law enforcement comes into contact with somebody with a small amount of illegal substances in their possession. What should that response be? Oregon has varied this since about 2017. So previous to 2017, everything was at the felony level. And so our legislature passed House Bill 2355 in 2017 that changed some of the user amount PCS offenses to a misdemeanor, that A misdemeanor level. So really the idea here was that, felony conviction on somebody's background check creates a lot of collateral consequences. If they are struggling with substance use disorder and have not committed other felonies, they shouldn't have those collateral consequences kind of following them for a long period of time. So the legislature made that change in 2017. And then Oregon has a ballot measure process. So in 2020, I'm sure you've heard a few headlines along the years. In 2020, Oregon voters passed ballot measure 110 or M110, as we like to say. That made a lot of changes, but on the criminal law side, it lowered possession of user amounts of drugs to the violation level. So this decriminalized drug possession in Oregon. So again, if law enforcement comes into contact with somebody possessing a user amount of drugs, that person would receive a citation similar to a speeding ticket, with some encouragement to engage in treatment. And that was, of course, a huge change in Oregon. I think the COVID time warp is very real, and I'll kind of get to this a little bit on the next slide, but just want to remind folks this passed in November 2020 and was effective February 1, 2021. So that's how quickly this change occurred. And remind everybody what was happening in the world in February 1, 2021. Oregon was just starting to implement, COVID vaccine rollouts. In Oregon, we still had many restrictions on events and businesses for COVID mitigation efforts. I mean, I think in February, some businesses were just restaurants outdoor only eating, right? So in the wintertime, kind of having that happen. School children at most school districts were still in fully remote learning. My children didn't go back to school till March, April that year. That was the case for most larger districts in Oregon. So in that environment, this pretty substantial change occurred in Oregon. Other changes happened too. It's kind of the consensus by 2024 for the Oregon legislature is we got to change things here. So in 2024, House Bill 4002 was passed that has now recriminalized small amounts of drug possession back to the misdemeanor level, but an unclassified misdemeanor, which I guess is a little lower than an A misdemeanor. So back to that misdemeanor level. But again, recognizing that if folks have substance use disorder, that there needs to still be a way to direct to treatment and services and not funnel too far into the criminal justice system for those offenses. And so along with recriminalizing drug possession was also this effort of let's create and fund deflection programs to still have that kind of public health, behavioral health response to drug possession offenses. Okay, so before we get to drug possession, as a group of researchers here, I think you'll be interested in this. So here we have our weekly drug possession arrests over time, and we in Oregon we love dashboards. So there on the bottom right is a lovely little dashboard link if you wanna check it out. There's some other measures there too. So you can see pre-COVID, right, roughly around 300 arrests per week. We've got the COVID-19 line on there. That is mid-March 2020. No denying that. We see that similar drop with other criminal arrests as well. Some rebound through the summer, and then Measure 110 passes in November 2020. And those arrests dropped to about 50 a week during the time of Measure 110. Now, we think that those are arrests for more than a user amount, substantial quantity arrests, potentially picking up for warrants, right? So again, if somebody has a user amount of drugs that they are possessing, they cannot be arrested. It's at the violation level. Arrest is not an option here, unless, of course, there's some other criminal violation along with it. So we see that, pretty substantial drop, which makes sense given how the law is defined. And then September 1, 2024, drug possession is at the misdemeanor level, and that change happens very quickly, pretty substantially there, September 1. So we now have, about getting close to a year of data post to this change. So of course we see that increase in arrests. It's roughly about 200 a week. Lower than those pre-COVID levels. So, I think that shows that, yes, of course, we have arrests coming back on with this law change, but we're not at the 2019 levels for these offenses. So a little background there for Oregon. But along with bringing possession back to the misdemeanor level, the legislature creates and funds deflection programs in Oregon. So what does that look like in Oregon? So again, House Bill 4002 did give us a pretty broad definition of what a deflection program is. But the idea here providing a lot of flexibility. Counties are creating these programs. There is a tribal component as well on a slightly different timeline with some different requirements. But really giving counties an opportunity to create a program that's going to work best for the county in their specific needs and environment. So there are required partnerships kind of listed there. You must have the partnership of the DA, at least one law enforcement agency in the county, hopefully all of them, must have the involvement of the community mental health program, and then a provider from a behavioral health resource network. Programs are required to identify a program coordinator. These, depending on the county, that person can be housed in different places. We'll get more into this, required tracking and reporting data. So again, kind of looking at this definition on the right-hand side of the screen, it's broad, right? It doesn't specify that this needs to happen right pre-arrest, right? Sometimes an arrest occurs and the deflection may happen after the arrest. Sometimes a case is filed and the deflection can happen after the case is filed. It also doesn't say that it has to come from a law enforcement officer. Most counties did start with kind of that law enforcement interaction model to start with, but it can also be different pathways, right? So law enforcement prevention, meaning law enforcement kind of refers somebody to the program, but they're not facing any criminal charges. It could be like a social referral or a first responder. Naloxone Plus has been one that I think has a lot of potential, right? The response after kind of that overdose prevention work. So there is a lot of flexibility in terms of how to pull these together. But also with the variance of different programs across the state can make, again, tracking data and outcomes a challenge there too. So again, just a kind of a reminder, we like to remind our funders of this and some other folks too. This timeline has been so fast. The law passed in April. And so we CJC have both worked on the reporting and the data side, and then also the grant making side. So just a plug for that. Have your researchers and your grant administrators work closely together and you can do good things. And so our grant team, I don't know how they did it. They moved so fast. And so as you can see here, we got those initial 28 grant awards out by August so that the programs that were really on top of things and could start right on September 1 were able to do that. So 10 programs across the state were able to do that. And then by November, 17 programs, and by February, 26 programs. And so today, We have over 1,900 people that have been referred to deflection programs across the state. So the timeline, both the grant timeline for our agency was fast, for counties to get a program up and running very fast. And then I'm going to talk some about the data and tracking, which was also fast, and we would not have been able to do on our own. But we partnered with a great team of researchers from OHSU, Oregon Health and Sciences University, co-located with Portland State University PSU School of Public Health. And we contracted with them to implement a data tracking system called REDCap. We had previously worked with them to do something similar on another grant program that was on not nearly as tight of a timeline. So we had something to build from there, but knew this timeline was going to be really tight and definitely a challenge. So with their help, they worked with local programs while they're trying to figure out exactly how their program's going to work on this timeline, to figure out what elements need to be in this system so that we're all tracking things in the same way with the same definitions. And how does this look? And we do, in our grant agreements, have a requirement that data is entered into REDCap. So that has been incredibly helpful to be able to do that, but not without its challenges in that, again, that timeline's been really quick. And then this system is about data tracking for research purposes, but it's not a case management system. It's not built to do that. So we do have some programs where they have a pretty robust case management system. They have to enter the information into that, and then they have to turn around and enter it into our system, which of course they're not a fan of, and I don't blame them. But they cannot extract the information out of that case management system to give it to us to do the work we need to do. So it has created the way to collect the data consistently across those systems to be able to do that. I'm sure a lot of folks on this call have the experience of trying to collect data, self-reported data from grantees to put together measures. It can be rough. You think about all those Excel files, and it makes my head spin. So we have not done that. We have done this, which has been great, but has had some challenges in terms of just the quick timeline. And then there is the burden of the grantees having to enter the data while they're trying to do all the other things that they do. But it's been very beneficial to have this system set up. So what is it looking like so far? So we have another dashboard and there for some deflection data. So here we have deflection referrals to date across Oregon here. So you'll see and I will say this is a lovely little screenshot from our dashboard. So if you were on the dashboard, you could hover over the county and the name would pop up and some other information. So a little geography quiz here of Oregon counties. So the ones that are not the white counties, the ones that are not shaded. So those counties said, hey, we're not ready to do this. We're not really feeling it. They did not apply for funds. It was a formula grant. They could have applied for funds. They decided not to. So I know on the map, it looks like a lot of the state, but Oregon has some very rural, even frontier counties. And so if you add up the population of these 8 counties that didn't apply, it's about 6% of the state's population. So geography wise more, but 6% population wise. And so Douglas County is kind of the most populous county, about 111,000 that decided not to apply. And then you'll see some of these counties, particularly in Eastern Oregon, right? 4, 3, 7. Again, these are very sparsely populated, large counties. And so of the 11 counties that have 10 or fewer referrals, again, if we add those all up, that's also about 6% of the population. So that is one challenge. Is we want every county to have the opportunity to implement a deflection program. When your population of your county is 9,000 people, that looks very different than a urban county implementing a program. But again, every county has the opportunity to apply for funds and stand up a program. And then our kind of largest referral counties do generally fit with population trends. So up on the northern northern border there is Multnomah County with 568. That is home to Portland, Oregon, which you probably hear about every now and again. And then Lane County with 221, kind of about middle part of the western part of the state, home to Eugene, Oregon, so pretty large city. And then Marion County with 191, home to Salem, Oregon, the capital. And also those are the three largest cities in the state. So that kind of fits with the information that we have there. So that, that provides some county level information of how things are going here. And again, not all counties started right on September 1. Some started March, April 2025, and have really only been operating for about 6 months here. So still very much new and evolving. Okay, and then more information again from that dashboard that we're planning to add more to as things go along. But here on the left-hand side is showing kind of the flow of events for deflection. So we kind of have the funnel, right, of somebody is referred and then qualified and then actually entering deflection. So far we've got about 1,300 individuals that have entered into deflection here. We'll talk about these bottom three here on the next slide. And again, so, some of the benefits of the red cap system and having these standardized measures that counties have to enter in is we get some really good information, especially we've identified kind of here's what's required, here's what you have to enter, versus if you do this, please enter these variables, but you don't have to. And so we can identify folks coming into the program that have an identified substance use disorder, mental health, or co-occurring. And so you can see the majority of folks coming in do have a substance use disorder. I think not a surprise to anybody, but to be able to show the data and show the information of, hey, this is not a college kid who got caught partying one night, right? This is somebody with an identified substance use disorder. And there's going to be a lot of challenges, right? And for that person to engage in the program and maintain kind of that treatment work. And then also very happy that we included this information, which is the type of housing that the person has, and the majority are unsheltered. So we have folks with unsheltered housing situations with substance use disorder is the majority of the clients in the programs. I think speaks to the challenges that are going to come through in providing the services. So, and then again, if you factor in other temporary living arrangements like couch surfing, living in a vehicle, or living in a homeless shelter, again, kind of speaks to the varied needs of those in the program. Oh, good, it went. Okay. And then we also have at least these measures of folks that were unsuccessful currently in the program and successfully completed. Now, as Ohio spoke to, definition of successful completion varies across these programs. They're able to decide what that is. So there's one challenge. The any kind of time requirement, again, up to the program. So there's that piece. And we've provided this information on the dashboard. We get asked it a lot, and I think you all can kind of see where this is going, right? Folks take that unsuccessful deflection currently in the program is successfully completed, calculate that percentage and go, hey, the majority are failing. So we're like, wait, hold on. So you can fail, you can terminate out of the program very quickly, right? It'll take you 2 days. So it's a quick outcome to not be successful. Again, those success criteria vary by county, and those currently in the program, they have a decent amount of time in the program. I think as these programs have gotten up and running, they're like, yeah, this 30-day requirement, that's probably not reasonable. It's going to take longer than that, right? And also in terms of somebody misses an appointment, somebody doesn't show up to treatment. Okay, is that an automatic failure, or is that a, hey, let's see what's up with them. Let's re-engage. Did they relapse? What's the right response here? So I think there is a lot of work in terms of follow-up and engagement with folks for this to really work. And supportive of that is at least some of this data here, where the most typical reasons identified for an unsuccessful deflection, top two, did not engage with treatment, and lost to follow-up. So these folks did enroll in the program, did engage for some period of time, and then were lost to engagement after that. So I think, again, speaking to that case management and engagement work, the work of peers that can be provided, again, as Ohio described there, can be really helpful and important. And also recognizing somebody might do really well for about 2 weeks and then start to struggle a little bit. And how is the program going to handle that? And what is that going to look like? So I know several programs are still working through some of those challenges as well. Okay. Also kind of what Ohio talked about, right? Emerging, the evaluation work is emerging. We've called this best practices. We also will say promising practices, and again may borrow from other types of programs as well. And so we did a report out back in April to kind of say, okay, what's working and where should the encouragement be as these programs continue to get up off the ground. And so the first is to kind of expand that program eligibility. A lot of programs started with just that PCS charge, very quickly realized, hey, it probably makes sense to also loop in criminal trespass too, which is a low-level misdemeanor on that side. Some counties are also folding in theft too, low-level shoplifting, right? So pretty low-level misdemeanor public order offenses that potentially those folks could be successful in deflection. And do you want to expand into some of those types of areas? It doesn't have to be PCS only. And a lot of counties are starting to do that. And then again, operating multiple pathways has been a lot of support for that as well. The law enforcement piece is really important and helpful, but it can also be broader than that as well, depending again on what makes sense for the counties. And then we like to talk about warm handoffs. What in the world is a warm handoff? Again, this engagement component for running the program, right? I mean, I think we saw with Measure 110, you hand somebody a ticket, say, please call this phone number. It doesn't work really well, right? Hey, show up at this place next Monday. Whew, you're going to lose people. Instead, the law enforcement officer is transporting somebody to a deflection center, or a peer is arriving on the scene. And when you have that kind of engagement, both to get folks into the program, but then to continue engagement in the program, you're going to see better outcomes. And we are seeing about half of the referrals are not able to include that warm handoff, but it is also a challenge with resources, right? Some are able to do it during certain hours, but not 24/7. And there is a resource component to be able to build the capacity towards that best practice there. Okay, and I will conclude with what are some of our challenges are going to be moving forward, similar to what Ohio described here, right? How in the world do we measure success? And right now, each program is doing it a little bit differently. And we do have this challenge of measuring individuals who go through the program versus kind of these overall system measures, right? So again, we really hope that it is having a positive impact on overdose deaths. We would like to think those drug possession arrests are lower than they were pre-COVID because of deflection, but I'm not sure we can make that leap quite yet. And that we have increased availability in these communities. But then for individuals, we can measure subsequent criminal justice involvement, how well they engaged with the treatment and case planning, and other stability factors like the housing components that we have in the Red Cap system. We haven't done it yet, but we CJC have the ability and are planning to take this deflection information, and we CJC will look at criminal justice outcomes. So we will at least have that criminal justice result consistently across all the programs. And that can at least answer the question of, hey, if the point of deflection is to keep folks out of the criminal justice system, how did that actually happen and how did it happen? Now, again, if they have a subsequent arrest for drug possession and criminal trespass too, that maybe is not so much of a surprise, right? That's kind of what's happening. But if we're seeing higher level offenses for folks that have gone through deflection programs, then there's an opportunity for some improved engagement coming through what that is looking like. And then, yes, always a challenge with the kind of folks involved in the program and the community buy-in. So Some counties have had great success with law enforcement buy-in, others are still working on it. Some will have one big law enforcement agency really bought in, and so the other agencies are like, they're doing it. We're good, right? We don't want to do that. And, we're not, that's not quite the idea here. Um, Even with some of the treatment provider contract work, right? If they're already really busy with the work they already have, they're like, man, this deflection thing, I don't know, it's a lot of work. It's a really tough population. It's a lot of work. We're already kind of doing this over here. So some of that can be a challenge, some of the work with first responders. So there's a need for that. Oh man, I should have picked a more cheery note to end on. But I guess it's been a theme for us yesterday and today is just the funding challenge here, right? And similar to what Ohio described. These programs are in a good place in that they received formula state grant funds to get this up and going. So they have really gotten an opportunity to get a foundation. So about 20.7 million back in 2024 was awarded. And then just in June, our budget passed of 40 million for the next 2 years. So that gives about 3 years of funding for that infrastructure and to get the programs up and running. Come February to June 2027 is going to be the time to make the case to renew funding to our state legislature. It's already looking like it's going to be a tight session. You're going to need to have some data and some outcomes to show what the investment is buying, so to speak, right? We haven't done this, but some folks took that 20.7 million and divided by the number of referrals and said, oh, wow, this looks like a really expensive program. We're like, please don't do that. They're just getting started. They had to hire a coordinator. What are you talking about? But those, that critical view is there. And so it's really, I think the next year and a half is going to be pretty crucial in terms of stabilizing the programs and then getting funding the next time around. Just like everybody else is going to be asking for funding next time around. So that will be the next big challenge there. I think. All right. That was a
Well, thank
lot.
you.
I will stop
Yeah.
there.
Well, thank you, Kelly. That was great. And thank you, Sarah and Kim, as well, for your presentations. Very interesting. It's not going to surprise you. We did have a couple questions of interest here that, and it revolves around measurement and data. I know that's surprising for this audience, but there's some interest in learning more about the PMAT and how that can be used, and maybe if it could be used across other jurisdictions as well on similar types of programs. And also, the red cap, and its usefulness and how that might relate to other types of programs as well. So I don't know if you want to start first with the PMAT, Cam or Sarah?
Sure, and I can actually put a couple of links in the chat as a resource for folks. There's at least one published article, I think, on the development of the PMAT, and then there's the website you can kind of go to. I think for me, what I see the value in it, we don't yet have like validation data for that particular instrument, but it reminds me of the correctional program checklist or the correctional program assessment inventory for those folks that have any experience in correctional treatment. And those are tools that are validated, but they do the same thing, right? They have an entire list of kind of practices that we go out and we look for that evidence of that practice. And for every practice you have, you kind of get another point, right, to get a score. And the higher your score, the lower recidivism rates tend to be, in the research that we have so far. And so the PMAT's not that far along in terms of its research, evidence behind it, but it does the same thing, and they pulled it from existing research to come up with the items that they put on there. So it is an evidence-informed tool. And from someone who's done QI for many, many years for an organization, what I like about it is it has got a very strong CQI or continuous quality improvement potential there, and that's really its intended use, is to help those teams then kind of make their decisions based on resources and infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. Where do they want to start, and where can they move forward? And then that applicability of like potentially seeing where they're at against other teams is also a benefit. So I can put a couple of things in the chat that might be of help to folks.
Thank you, Kim. Kelly, how about you? How's REDCap been useful, and is it something that could be used elsewhere, or?
Yeah, so yeah, it's like I said, we really leaned on our partners at OHSU, and they've used that system in other settings.
Okay.
I think in some kind of crisis emergency response type settings, and so they they really have the infrastructure to create the setup specific to deflection programs, and also to train the county folks on how to use it. So it is a secure web-based system. So at least for the grantees, there's not a burden there in terms of jumping into it and using it. I think the grantees would say the burden is entering the data in. And I think they started with, oh, all these 50 things are all important, and we're going to enter in all 50 of these things every month for everybody. And now things are getting real, and that's
Yeah.
true. And so we've kind of narrowed those. For most counties, we've kind of been able to narrow what the required reporting elements are, and that's working pretty well. Some of the larger counties also can do a bulk upload, and are figuring out the details. But of course, you need somebody with the skills to put the file together to upload it. And so just for a handful of large counties, that's been working pretty well too. And again, it's a for research purposes data collection tool, right? So what are the most important measures that we're going to capture consistently across the different programs, so that we know what's happening within those programs? But it's not, it's not measuring overdose deaths. It's not going to measure outcomes once that person leaves the program. And so there is still a need for some pretty strong research support behind it as well, right? So it's a tool to get the information. You're still going to need to do that pretty rigorous research with it. Also, the team at OHSU has done, gosh, I can't remember what it was, but they were very excited. I think they wrote a paper that got picked up that kind of talked about, hey, here's how we decided what the most important elements were in implementing this really quickly evolving deflection program. So kind of a data collection implementation type of work. So I will track that down and send it to the JIRN folks, so that if folks are interested, they can access that.
Okay, great. Hey, we just have just a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes left. I thought we could just end on something here. Both of your presentations were, heavy on the implementation side and what's happening early, I guess, in a lot of this work. But I guess I had a question about, how do you, are you doing any sort of strategies to get like local stakeholders and so forth engaged in deflection programs when they're skeptical? And maybe there's some skepticism out there about these kinds of things. And then and related to that is, what advice would you give other jurisdictions seeking to implement a deflection program in some of their jurisdictions? I guess Kim or Sarah, do you want to go first?
Sarah, do you want to go? I feel like I've done more talking. Although I can always talk.
You go ahead and I can chime in.
No, I think you've probably had a little more direct experience, like working directly with teams that might be more applicable around some of those, what I think are more operational in terms of like skepticism and things like that. Because I don't think I've done that directly with our teams. We've done a little bit of process work around messaging and things like that, but not a lot in my space for my team.
So for the work that I've done, I feel like Ohio has been incredibly receptive to this type of work, and it's really proliferated throughout the state as a general rule. I have seen a couple implementations of a different diversion programs that have been met with some resistance from different stakeholders. And so that can be challenging, right? And I think I'm just going to throw them under the bus, but that happened here in Hamilton County. I wrote about it, but recently, where have everybody at the table who's invested in it, believing in it, contributing to it, it's gonna flounder. I think what was the second part of your question is advice?
Well, it's just what would you recommend for another jurisdiction wanting to start a deflection program?
Yeah, the things that I have seen work really well is getting everybody at the table from the outset and having those conversations and figuring out what different parties need and what their goals are, and trying to come to some consensus that everyone can meet at. Most of my work, aside from the statewide stuff, has been in my county, in Hamilton County, and I feel like they've just done this incredible job of getting so many different people to the table, business leaders, politicians, policymakers, people involved in treatment, people who are, people with lived experience. Like everybody's at the table sharing things and really getting people to get past. I feel like we don't even have this anymore. I'm probably overselling it, but getting past like some of the divisions that can arise. I don't know if it's like territoriality or like just speaking different languages, things like that, just getting everybody on the same page saying like we have a common goal here. And so if everyone's working toward that goal, we're all going to succeed. And that's just been a really cool thing to see with the teams that work, is getting everybody. But you really do need a champion or two or three and people who are in that role for a long time. And there's not there's not a lot of turnover to really rally the troops, if you will.
Okay, Kelly, 5 words. What would you recommend?
5 words. I can't do it. 5 words.
I just teasing you. Well, we are close to wrapping up, but is there something you would say to recommend?
Honestly, in Oregon, I kind of described those law changes. House Bill 4002, the timeline to get that thing passed was really tight. And there was an earlier version that had a more prescriptive version of deflection programs. The counties hated it. And so I think the deal was, hey, we'll give you the flexibility to do this how you want to do it, but make it work. And hey, we're going to give you the money to get this up and running, but you got to make it work. So I think there is some of that pressure there, and the funding is there. It's formula funding, and so hey, if your DA is not on board and they're leaving $500,000 on the table, that's a tougher ask than, oh hey, we're not going to apply for that grant. So that I think that has been at least help people come to the table and get things happening. And also, hey, if this is and thinking from kind of the law enforcement perspective, right? Hey, you were supportive of moving to a U misdemeanor. You can't put all these people in your jail. Like we don't think that that's the right way to handle this. We know you don't have the capacity to do this. Nobody has the budget for it. We got to do this a little bit differently, and this is the way to really make this work. So I think that was part of the kind of higher level policy motivation for folks to stand these up so quickly.
All righty. Well, I want to thank all of you again, and thanks for everybody who participated as well in the chat. And I'll turn it over, I guess, to either George or somebody at JIRN who can take us to the next session or close it out.
Hi, I'll step in. It's Susan Howley. First of all, I'd like to echo my thanks for the presenters. And there's so many great questions that we didn't have time for. If you do have a chance to look over those questions in chat and there's anything that you can respond to, I'm sure the audience would really appreciate that. Now we're going to go to another commercial break, and Jason will share another of JIRN's benefits. And after that, we'll come back for our final session.
JIRN members have access to the Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative, or CITI program. CITI provides online research, ethical compliance, and professional development courses. Organizations worldwide, including the top 25 national universities and all U.S. academic medical centers, rely on the CITI program for research, ethics, compliance, and professional development education. CITI courses promote responsible and ethical research across disciplines, covering topics such as human subject research, information privacy and security, responsible conduct of research, and research study design. Many funders and institutional review boards require researchers to complete CITI training before granting project approval. If your project involves human participants through surveys, interviews, or the use of secondary data that contains personal information, most institutions require a CITI certificate. This certificate confirms that you have successfully completed a course in social and behavioral science research. CITI trainings teach researchers to conduct research responsibly, protect participants, and maintain data integrity. After passing, individuals receive a certificate, often needed for grants, collaborations, or approvals. Beyond these requirements, CITI training also improves skills in grant management, data transparency, and research conduct. Through JIRN, you can take courses and earn certificates on Essentials of Grant Proposal Development, Social Behavioral Educational Comprehensive, Research Study Design, IRB Administration, Participant-Centered Informed Consent, and Public Health Research. As a JIRN member, these courses are free of charge. Each course includes several modules, presentations, reading materials, and exams designed to assess your understanding of the subject. Getting started is easy. Just sign up as a member. Already a member? Just let us know you'd like city training access, and we'll set up your account for you. To learn more about the Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative and all the benefits of JIRN membership, visit our website.
All right, welcome back, everyone. My name's Susan Howley, and I am the Interim Executive Director here at JIRN. It is so good to see the conversation from the last session still continuing in chat. So if you haven't looked at that, go ahead and see what you're missing. But I'd like you to also turn your attention to this last session of the day, which is something I've really been looking forward to. It's on transforming the juvenile justice system, evidence, collaboration, and system reform. You know, we can't really make headway in criminal justice unless we help the juveniles, unless we have a better, clearer understanding of what happens at the juvenile level. So our presenters today are going to share some innovative, data-driven approaches to strengthening juvenile justice systems, highlighting the work of the Maryland and the Kentucky State Statistical Analysis Centers. First up, we're going to have Jeffrey Zubak and Brianna Irwin from the Maryland SAC, which is part of the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention. They're going to share the work that they're doing to link data sets that track youth as they move through the juvenile and criminal justice systems. This work provides a more complete picture of youth justice trajectories and policies to close service gaps and improve outcomes. Now, we're going to save the questions for the end of the whole session, but go ahead and enter those questions in chat as you think of them. And with that, I will turn things over to Maryland.
Thanks, Susan. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Perfect.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So thank you for allowing us to present. This is a study that we're very excited about. It is still in its preliminary stages. We do have some interesting findings, but there's still a lot more that we're hoping to uncover, over the next year. This was a project that was funded through the State Justice Statistics Program, through the core capacity component of the grant. So before we really dive in to this, I guess let's just go to the next slide real quick, just to provide a quick overview of the Maryland SAC. And I've been with the SAC for about 15 years. I've been the director for probably 10 or 11 of those years. I did leave the SAC briefly. We were a small SAC for a long time. It was just myself and two analysts that were federally funded. And then I left and I was recruited to run the SAC again with the caveat that we would have a larger team, which is very exciting. So we did increase our staff since I've came back. We now have a team of, myself, 5 analysts. We also have two interns that we have throughout the spring and fall semesters. So it's been very exciting to increase the size of our SAC. We do have 2 analysts that are funded through SJS, and this is one of those projects, just some of the other projects that we're doing. That's not the focus of this, but just to provide a context of some of the other projects that we are receiving federally funding for are a local recidivism study, reporting application portal that really improves the way that we are collecting data for all of our different reporting requirements, doing a lot of local crime data analysis, and also looking at a composition of drug seizure data, and then what you're all here to see now, which is the Juvenile Justice Project. We know, I'm sure it's very similar in your jurisdictions around the country, but the juvenile justice process is a lot more complicated than the adult system. There's a lot of different decision points that happen along the way. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about what is actually happening with juvenile crime. And this study that we're working on is really an attempt to try to capture data on every decision point and really provide a better picture on juvenile crime in the state. So I'm going to turn things over to Brianna, this is her show. This is the project that she's been the lead on. So looking forward to hearing any questions that you have at the end of this presentation as well.
All right, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Susan. So the project we have, as Jeff just mentioned, is one of our state justice statistics projects. We began this in October of 2024, and we are planning to extend it into next year. In Maryland, we have several state mandates that are related to the collection and reporting of juvenile justice data, and some of them have changed or expanded in recent years. We've also had the inclusion of a Juvenile Justice Reform Act in 2024, and additionally, a Commission on Juvenile Justice Reform and Emerging and Best Practices was also formed last year. So we have a lot of interest at the state level in juvenile justice data. Some of the data points that we're being required to collect through the different mandates are juveniles who are charged as adults, those who are charged, convicted, and sentenced as adults, juvenile arrests and how frequently they result in a complaint with our Department of Juvenile Services, referrals to any at-risk youth prevention or diversion programs, and how many juveniles are being housed at state correction facilities and local correctional facilities. So it's a very wide net of what they're looking for, and we're also hoping to get more data in addition to that. So for this project, we're trying to streamline or improve the juvenile justice data collection for the state mandates and build partnerships with different state agencies in order to identify and connect any data that's relevant, bridge gaps between juvenile system and the adult criminal justice system. In doing this, we're having other intended outcomes for the project, which will be capturing the trajectory of youth offenders as they move from the juvenile justice system to the adult or vice versa, or what kind of pathways we're seeing for each of them and any diversion points, developing a comprehensive view of juvenile justice system and outcomes for justice-involved youth, identifying gaps in data collection, identifying gaps in the services that are available to youth, and also being able to inform decision makers of resource needs. Hopefully, our intention with the project is to create a very data-driven resource that anyone will be able to use, whether that is for internal, policymaking, or public information purposes. This slide is a flowchart of the Maryland juvenile justice system process created by the Department of Juvenile Services. For anyone interested, this is published annually inside DJS or Department of Juvenile Service. I apologize for all the times that the acronym will come out as I continue the presentation. They produce it annually in their data research guide. I have included a link and a QR code in the bottom left corner if you're interested. It is on page 22 of the PDF, page 10 of the document when you're going through it. And it's highlighting every step in the process that is being used as they are under Department of Juvenile Services supervision. So there's a key in the top right corner, and the key is breaking out what is taking place by colors and shapes. I will go through the colors just for the purpose of what we're talking about right now. Black is the representation of the entry point to the system. Blue is the process for the regular referral intake. Orange is a referral if it involves a detention request. Yellow is the period where they are part of the court process. Red is for a referral to outside services, which is only taking place from that regular referral process. Green is within the yellow portion, and it's case management tools and services, and purple is any exit points that they have mapped here. What is not included on this map is what we're seeking to bridge with our other data sources. So that is information on diverted youth and the services that they receive, and the juveniles who are going through the adult system, those who are always in the adult system for the time of their involvement with the justice system, those who are waived up to the adult, and those who are transferred down from the adult system. We don't have any markers on here that indicate the inclusion of juveniles from the adult system. However, they are part of the data set in the regular referrals. Okay, moving on to our next slide is the data that we are collecting in order to map that process ourselves and fill in those gaps that we're aware of. So we have 6 data sources that we've identified. The first is from the Department of Juvenile Services, where we are getting data on juvenile complaints and juveniles under the supervision of DJS. We are also going to be receiving data on any education programs overseen by DJS. Currently, we have an MOU in place where we have started receiving the complaint data, and we're going to be sharing some of that with you today. But we do not have the completely up-to-date data, and we do not have education yet. Second source that we are requesting is from the Administrative Office of the Courts. That is going to be for data on juveniles who've been charged as adults. We have submitted a request, and we're in the process of figuring out a data use agreement. A third source is the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. That is a state agency that collects and organizes education and workforce data at an individual level, and they also have access to other databases. So by receiving the ability to access their data, we'll be able to link juvenile justice data alongside social services data and education data. And two other sources that we're planning to collect via the form of surveys is from law enforcement agencies and state's attorney's offices. For law enforcement agencies, that will be related to how many youth they are arresting, how many youth they are diverting, what kind of factors they're considering in diversion of youth, and what factors they're considering when they are requesting detention of any youth that they have arrested. And from state's attorney's offices, that will be about how many youth are being forwarded for prosecution, what are they considering when determining whether or not to file a formal petition, who are they diverting, and what are they considering for diversion, and what kind of services are they connecting with. The sixth and final source we have here is the Governor's Office of Children for Children and Local Management Board, and that is going to be data on the number of children who are referred to and enrolled in at-risk youth prevention and diversion programs. Once we have all this data collected, we're going to be looking for unique identifiers that we're available to have within the data sets in order to link them across different parts of the process so that we're able to track and determine what kind of variations there are in trajectory depending on different factors. So we're looking to link the juvenile justice with the adult social services and education. And then we're going to be looking at that in variation with outcomes, location, and demographics, and other variables if they are of interest to the commission as well. Okay, and the final product we are creating for this is an interactive dashboard that's going to allow users to explore any trends and variations in juveniles involved in justice systems along the different decision points. So what you saw before with the flowchart is essentially what we'd like to fully map out in the form of a dashboard with the expansion to include the other data that we're seeking. So it's going to allow someone to go in, they'll be able to filter it down to a specific year of when the data they're looking for, a specific jurisdiction, specific demographic information. It could be by different offenses or different outcomes for the cases. And it would be something publicly available so that everyone is able to access that and know what's going on either in their area or across the state. Since it's such a broad project involving very vast data sets related to justice-involved youth, we have some initial questions, and it's a much longer list. This is just kind of a starting point that we have. Those that are bolded on this slide are ones that we're going to be getting into with some of the preliminary data that we have already. But just to give a brief tidbit of some things we're going to be looking into as we continue this over the next year. One is what factors are being used by police to determine whether to request detention. We're interested in how that's varying by jurisdiction, how that may be varying by time, and looking at kind of what's consistent, what's different, are there best practices? How do requests for detention vary by county and youth demographics? And how do the decisions vary when detention is requested? What portion of youth who are charged as adults are later transferred to the juvenile system? And of those who are transferred to juvenile, how long are they spending in any adult facilities pre-transfer? That's something that's been of interest greatly in the last couple of years. What are the number of child in need of supervision petitions authorized or denied by jurisdiction? And how do dispositions vary by county? These are, again, just opening questions, and we have a longer list of things that will be explored on the dashboard, either in the format of showing that kind of process map or in just being able to explore them through other visualizations. So turning to some of our data, what we've received so far from the Department of Juvenile Services is data from state fiscal year 2021 through the majority of state fiscal year 2025. Since we don't have a complete year for 2025, we're only including data through 24 here. So each of the next couple slides is all covering the same overall population. The total complaints over this period were 44,753. There were 82,903 offenses. There can be multiple offenses involved in a complaint, and offenses don't necessarily mean it was a criminal event. You can also have a complaint with DJS if it's for a violation of probation or if it is for a child in need of supervision petition. The total juveniles is also that they may have multiple complaints per juvenile, and that was 24,858. All the data that we're showing below is at the complaint level, not at the offense or juvenile level. Of complaints, 63% were against African American or Black youth, 26% for white youth, and 8% for Hispanic or Latino. The age at the time of complaint was most commonly those who were age 14 to 15 with 38%, 21% were age 16, and 21% were also age 17. We have a breakdown here, 15% for those who were aged 10 to 13. There was a very small portion under the age of 10, and we do also have data on those who were 18 and over. That would be circumstances where the offense was committed before they were 18, but they were not arrested and had a complaint until after they'd already become an adult. We also have a sex breakdown where 71% of complaints involved a male juvenile and 29% were a female juvenile. On this next slide, we're still looking at that same overall population. Here we have breakdowns by the complaint source, the alleged offense category, and whether or not detention was requested. So looking at the complaint source, the majority, 91%, were coming from law enforcement or police. 4% were being waived down from adult court, and 2% were for violations. Those are technical violations. The alleged offense, this will add up to more than 100 because multiple offenses can be involved in the same complaint. So 79% of complaints involved a misdemeanor, 19% involved a felony, and 12% involved a crime of violence. And then when we look at detention requests, we're looking specifically at complaints from law enforcement. So of the 91% that were filed by law enforcement, 10% of the complaints had a request for detention. The next slide is going to break that out a bit more. So for this slide and the next two, we are focusing on the 5 counties where we had the most complaints filed. And when we're looking here at only complaints filed by police departments, that is nearly 50% of the complaints. When we look at the full picture of complaints, it is more than 50% of the complaints. And just to give a frame of reference, for those of you who are not intimately familiar with the demographics of Maryland and the breakdown across counties, they are our 5 largest jurisdictions. We have Anne Arundel County, which is where our state capital, Annapolis, is. We have Baltimore County, which surrounds Baltimore City. Baltimore City is our 3rd on this chart. Montgomery County and Prince George's County both border the District of Columbia. And between those 2 counties, there's over 2 million people. So they are where we're finding the highest numbers of complaints being filed. When complaints were filed by police, in this case, there was 22,000 of them. This is the distribution of whether or not detention was being requested. On the previous slide, we saw that it was 10% across the state. We're seeing an average around there for 4 of these jurisdictions. However, for Baltimore City, which is in the middle, there was 59% of complaints involved a request for detention. The policies and practices for detention requests vary by jurisdiction. This is something that we're going to be looking into more project. It was just noteworthy as something that really stood out to us in the data due to this very large discrepancy between different jurisdictions. But we're going to get into decisions within them in just a moment. So the request from detention will come from an individual agency who has arrested the youth. But the decision of whether or not to detain will come from the Department of Juvenile Services. They have a detention risk assessment instrument that they use in order to determine if someone is of high, low, or medium or moderate risk for detention. And they will provide a recommendation for whether to have an alternative to detention, to detain, or to release. And then the next day, the case will be reviewed in court, and it will be determined by the judge if they will be held or released. But this is that temporary decision about detention that's being made by DJS. So here we have within those same 5 jurisdictions, when a request was made and decided, which was 3,400 different complaints. This was our breakdown of whether or not they were receiving an alternative to detention, or release. And we can see that while the decision to request detention was very common in Baltimore City, the majority of those ended with the juvenile being released. And in the other jurisdictions, a larger portion was where they were being detained. So it was just something that we're going to be looking into more as we continue working on the project. Our next slide is about dispositions varying by county. Again, we're still looking at those 5 central jurisdictions of the state. This was 56.1% of complaints came out of those jurisdictions. 45.5% were resolved or disapproved at intake. That's meaning that they did not move forward with those complaints, so they are being excluded from what's being displayed in the data below. But of those complaints, there was about 9,800 where there was a recorded disposition. We did not include any pending dispositions, which is what would have been recognized if there was an adjudication that took place and a disposition had not been reported yet. So this is what we have looking only at those where a disposition is recorded. And we're just showing a breakdown of what was taking place in those 5 jurisdictions. So the most common disposition in 4 was probation. And we can see that in Baltimore City, we see a higher portion of complaints that were dismissed. And they also had the highest portion of these 5 jurisdictions where they were committed to a Department of Juvenile Services facility. But we will be looking at this more in detail in relation to what kind of offenses there were and maybe about durations for what we're seeing in terms of the sentences, either to commitment or for probation. At this stage of the project, we do have a few gaps that we've already identified. The first is the number of youth who have been arrested. We do not have a clear picture of that. Looking at our Department of Juvenile Services data, when we have complaints that were filed, A, it's not including youth who were diverted by the police. So that's the second point we have for a gap. And B, it's also including complaints that were not from arrests. So that is what we're going to be hoping to gather from the law enforcement survey we'll be distributing. In addition, we'll be asking about the youth they are diverting and any stipulations or services involved in that diversion. Back on the DJS side of things, we're also going to be looking into services that juveniles are receiving when they're being diverted from DJS supervision. That's not something that was currently available to be shared and collected. However, that is something I believe they are looking into moving forward to collect on a regular basis. And we're also trying to fill a gap here with durations across facilities related to individual cases or individual complaints. The way that the data are maintained by the Department of Juvenile Services are a bit fragmented, where you will see information that is related to a specific juvenile, but it may not be related to a specific complaint or legal incident. So this is an area where we could strengthen an ability to document what is taking place on a more automated level of how long durations are in one linked incident. Next steps we have right now for this project are to continue our data collection. We showed those 6 that we're planning to collect. We currently have 1 and 2 that are in progress in terms of developing an agreement. We are still looking to further expand that out and get the 3 additional sources as well. We're also looking to link across systems. That is something that's hopefully going to be possible with the Maryland Longitudinal Data System connection and whatever we are able to receive from the Administrative Office of the Courts for the juveniles who are charged as adults. And when we have the data received, we're going to be building them into that interactive display to showcase our findings. And that is the end for this. Any questions? I don't know if this is the time for that, if that comes later.
We'll have some questions at the end, but since we have a little time now, folks, drop your questions in chat if you already have some. I did have a question. Where have the sticking points been so far? This is a very ambitious project that you have going. Has it been the data sharing agreements?
I apologize. I'm trying to make the Zoom window work better. Thanks. Could you give me an example of what you mean by a sticking point?
Where are your challenges coming up early on?
I would say it's with the fragmenting of how the data are maintained in some different systems from different agencies, and in order to link things even just within one agency's data or one issue, and what you're just mentioning with getting access to data.
Yeah, I know that can be an issue where different jurisdictions or even different agencies within a jurisdiction are collecting the data in a slightly different way or using a different system and then trying to get all those to harmonize. I know it's still early days. You've got a lot more to do here, but do you have any advice if any other state were like, oh, we want to do one of those? An initial, if you're going to do this, make sure you do A, B, and C, or even A.
I think the biggest part is to make sure that you're including everyone who's a part of the process when you're planning it. So that way you can learn as much as you need about the entirety of the system. You can you'll have people who have been working in this for 20+ years and will have lots of experience and know where gaps are, but just not have solutions to that yet. And that can really help guide where you might be trying to go with the project too.
Great.
I will say too, I think the timing of this, the funny thing is we actually applied for this in SJS before the new Juvenile Commission was formed, but I think that legislative element really adds a little bit of teeth to this. It really helps everybody know that like this is what's requested. We have a very vocal group, as a part of the commission that really wants to get access to this data as well. It's a very passionate topic. So if there's any legislative buy-in that you can get in this process, that'll really help as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. All right. Let's move on to our final presentation of the day from the Kentucky SAC. So I'd like to welcome Elsie Berger from the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice with Andrew Ritzel from the Kentucky Criminal Justice SAC. The two agencies have been partnering to conduct a comprehensive review of policies, operations, and data systems that led to the development of two transformative tools, the Juvenile Kentucky Offender Management System and a statewide data warehouse. These innovations modernize data sharing, align policy with practice, and strengthen evidence-based strategies to improve the lives of young people across the Commonwealth. Andrew and Elsie, we're really eager to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan. Okay, let me get the PowerPoint up. Let's see. Okay. Okay, are we good with the PowerPoint?
Yes, looks great.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much for having us. We're very excited to present today. And thank you, Jeff and Brianna, for your presentation. It's really neat to see what you all are doing in Maryland in terms of juvenile justice. So just to, I guess, briefly introduce ourselves, and I'll get into, what we'll be discussing today. But we are from the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet, Elsie and I. We've had the fortune of working together over the past several years. And so Elsie was initially the director of our SAC, and I followed in his footsteps after he transferred over to Department of Juvenile Justice. So let's see. Oop, there we go. So just to introduce myself a little bit more thoroughly, my name is Andrew Ritzel. I am currently the executive director of our Criminal Justice Statistical Analysis Centers, so CJSAC. And I have been with the cabinet for 3 years now. And we've been reestablishing our SAC over the past 3 years, and I've learned quite a bit from Elsie. And so still have the fortune to be able to work with him in various projects, such as presentations like this. Yeah, and so Elsie, I'll have you introduce yourself as well.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Elsie Berger. I currently serve as the Executive Director for the Office of Support Services with the Department of Juvenile Justice. As Drew referenced, he and I worked together on establishing the current SAC that we have in Kentucky, which he's really building out quite well. In addition to my job at the Department of Juvenile Justice, I also am a member of the Juvenile Justice Advisory Board, which is our state advisory group for our Title II funding as well.
Wonderful. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge the various grants that we used in coordination with several of our projects that we'll be covering today. We used 8 different grants to cover some of the award activities, and so we'll be covering different projects that our SAC has done over the years to help develop DJJ. And so thank you to Department of Justice and all of our federal funding partners for allowing them to support these activities. So our key objectives today in our presentation, we'll be talking about the role of the Kentucky SAC within the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet, demonstrate the use of braided funding streams for state level projects, and highlight the critical system developments within the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice. So to give you all a brief overview of the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet, so both our SAC and our Department of Juvenile Justice are located within the cabinet. We house 5 departments, including the Kentucky State Police, Department of Corrections, Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Criminal Justice Training, and then the Department of Public Advocacy as well. Additionally, we also include things like the Office of Drug Control Policy, the Office of the State Medical Examiner, and the Office of Investigations. Our SAC is located within the Office of Financial Management. We've actually bounced around a few times over the years, but I think this is where we've settled for the foreseeable future. Our Statistical Analysis Center, we consider ourselves to be relatively young. So in Kentucky, our original Statistical Analysis Center was established in 1984 within the Office of the Attorney General. It's existed in various forms and fashions over the years. I imagine, like many of our states here on the call today, in the recent years prior to Elsie and I reestablishing CJSAC, our Statistical Analysis Center and Grants Management Division existed as one entity, and so the director had the I guess privilege or the challenge of overseeing both all of the grants within our cabinet as well as the Statistical Analysis Center. We in 2022 reestablished our CJSAC. And so there was legislation that was passed in the spring, and in response, we reinstituted the CJSAC as a separate entity from our grants management division. There's still quite a bit of overlap, and we'll talk about that, but we now exist within the Office of Secretary, within the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet. We've developed the team over the years, so we started with 2 members of our team for the first, I guess, 2 years of the program, essentially. We now exist as 5 staff members, which I'm very thankful to have additional members of our team because it's quite a lot of work that we have under our purview. And RSAC, with it being reestablished, I think a lot of our focus right now, it's a little bit different than, I guess, what, a more established SAC would be. But we are focused a lot on federal grant management, and so we focus a lot on discretionary grants and opportunities to build capacity within the cabinet. We focus on improving the quality and usefulness of criminal justice statistics, and we really collaborate within the criminal justice system. And so we work quite a bit with the Administrative Office of the Courts. We work with, Department of Corrections. We work with police. We work with local law enforcement, trying to sort of get a holistic view of the criminal justice system and develop our systems to be able to support all of those endeavors. CJSAC funding, we are primarily funded through federal funding. So most of our staff members are funded through various grants. 2 of our staff members, their roles are entirely focused on operating. One is focused on operating the JAG grant, and the other is focused on the SACI grant. And then we do various projects using the other funding streams. Our operational funding comes from ARPA, and then we conduct strategic needs assessments within the cabinet and work with the departments to apply for federal funding opportunities. And so really, while in the future, I hope our emphasis is a little bit more on the research side of things, right now it is largely on capacity building and building our data systems so that we are having a more robust and more higher quality access of data.
So the Department of Juvenile Justice is, I guess, what we would kind of be known at is like a full service juvenile justice department. Different states have different shades of how they do business when it comes to juvenile justice. And as you all may or may not be aware, there's no federal component for juvenile justice outside of OJJDP, the grant making body. So there's no federal system. And so that has a good thing and a bad thing. It means that states operate very consistently, but also quite differently at times. And so we operate 27 facilities. One of the most distinguishing features of our system is, and it's good to hear Maryland say they run detention. Detention is a very interesting part of a juvenile justice system. It's the jail function, if you will, and it can be quite challenging, especially with data and the transient nature sometimes of the youth coming in. And at the bottom of this, we operate the day treatments, which are like an enhanced alternative school. So we operate 5 and then we contract for 31 others across the state. And so we are kind of in the not adjudicated system with the day treatments all the way through the jail system, through a youth development center, which would operate arguably like a prison, and then a group home that operates in a similar fashion to a halfway house or a transitory style setting. Statistically, we usually have about 250 youth in detention centers, but the season and the school year fluctuate those numbers wildly at times. Our youth development centers are around 100, with about 35 youthful offenders at any given point. That number fluctuates a little bit, but it's pretty consistent around 35. And then we have 8 group homes. A few of them we operate as substance use, and a few of them we operate as juvenile sex offender facilities. And they consistently have about 50 youth in those. Our day treatments are capacity right now is 24, and we're working internally to try to increase that capacity to 36. And we kind of use that ideally as like a preventative measure. Next slide, please. So this is a chart that relates to the offenses. And so back in 2014, there was a large reform bill passed in Kentucky that dealt with, it's called Senate Bill 200. It dealt with the offense levels, and what the goal of it was to try to get lower level offenses out of the juvenile justice system and focus it on the higher level offenses. And that bill seems to had the effect that was intended. We've seen the non-felony offenses go down significantly. There are still certain types of offenses, status offenses that interact with detention on the front end that impact that population. But for the most part, the higher level offenses tend to be what we have. And I would say anecdotally, most states will probably say that they have seen an increase in violent offenses, or the styling of offenses has increased over time with the youth population. Next slide.
Wonderful. And so for this presentation today, we're doing a little bit more of a high-level look at 4 projects that we've done over the years. And some of these are also currently ongoing. And so we'll be discussing our role in a legislative analysis. So looking at 2 bills that were passed in 2023 session and the impact on the juvenile justice system. We're looking at a juvenile detention system data capacity study. And so this was one that was sponsored through SJS funding and helped to inform some of our operations and development within DJJ. We are going to be looking at our Juvenile Kentucky Offender Management System, or JCOMS. And so that is our new corrections data management tool. And then we use that to track our juveniles within the system and house all of that data. And then finally, we're going to briefly talk about our DJJ data warehouse. And so that is our latest project that we're working on that we have a current award through SJS. Okay. So most of these will cover chronologically, and so I'll cover the beginning of this to lay the context, and then I'll hand it over to Elsie for the methodology section. This project was funded using FY21 ARPA funds, and so we in the cabinet, our role in CJSAC quite often is, we have a challenge within the cabinet, we need to figure it out, and so the secretary will call us in and say, we need more information on this. We need to figure out a solution for this challenge that we're facing. Can you help us with this? And of course, anytime that we're able to, we of course, supplement and work with our teams in the Justice Cabinet to be able to get that information and make it available. And so 2023, at CJSAC, we were tasked to analyze the impact of new legislation on the DJJ population. And so we looked both at detention data and court data to be able to get insight into housing capacity and facility limitations. And so the 2 bills that we were asked to look at, Senate Bill 162. And so this was to develop and implement as soon as practicable a plan that will transition back to a regional model of juvenile detention center facilities while safely segregating males and females and separating violent and nonviolent offenders. And so the key pieces here, transitioning back to regional model, segregating males and females, and separating violent and nonviolent offenders, and looking at our capacity to be able to do that. Second bill that was passed was House Bill 3, and so that is basically outlining that any child accused of committing a public offense that would be considered a violent felony offense is to be detained within a secure juvenile detention facility for a period not to exceed 48 hours. years. And so this is basically codifying the requirement for law enforcement officials to detain anyone that is being accused of a violent felony offense. Prior to this bill, it was inconsistent, so some law enforcement officers would detain a juvenile, others would not. And so we were looking at what effect that might have on our system and our ability to be able to respond to this mandate.
So we have a system that we currently use called detention booking system. It's almost 20 years old. It is a database, but it's one of the first versions of government-owned, government-operated. So the design of it and just the system components that it used have some limitations. And so as we've continued to evolve as an agency over the years at DJJ, the data infrastructure for detention booking has been modified within the capability of the system that existed, but obviously there were some challenges with that. And so what we ended up doing was taking a 2-day single snapshot. So we would pull data from the first and the third Wednesdays of each month. We would have that data pulled from the system with specific fields that we had provided in a listing as we drew up the methodology. And then myself and an intern would review that data over this 18-month period. And we would go through and categorize the high and low nature, the gender, and the location data, and make sure that all that was correct. And we did that to look at that Senate Bill 162, that regional model. We currently operate in a high and a low system. So males and females by gender are segregated by facility, not within facilities, but by facility. So that right now there's currently one female facility in our state. And then within highs and lows, we segregate those. And so we run 3 high facilities and 3 low facilities right now. One's closed for repair, but there would be a 4th low facility. And then we divide them up that way. So our methodology was to break them down into that and to look at and analyze when we could go back to that regional model, which we support because it keeps youth closer to generally their home and their jurisdiction, as well as relieve some transportation burdens on the system between the sheriff's office and the DJJ. So we did all of that by hand. I think it took us 6 weeks by the time we got everything done. We did our reviews internally, and then we would often pass it off to Drew and have him do a review as another set of eyes. And going through all that data, we were able to provide some insight to our cabinet leadership that they were ultimately able to share with some other folks, and then make legislative proposals based on Senate Bill 162. Next slide, please. So some of the capacity issues that we noticed, it gave us some insight into kind of how the crime high and low broke down amongst the gender, and just in general, it gave us a better perspective on how the crime flows, because our system, while we can get the data out, it's a bit of a manual process. So this gave us a very long range of that data set. And kind of what we saw in there was that with our existing facilities, if you remove the females, we could probably move back to a regional model, but without the addition of an additional facility for female only, we could not at this time, because when you divide the facilities up between highs and lows and all those things, you have enough capacity on paper, but when you run and you put all the numbers in there and you model everything, there are certain facilities where that model doesn't work, and then it bleeds over into another region or jurisdiction, which then sometimes busts that model. And so we went through and provided all that information internally to our cabinet leadership, and they were able to use that information to share with decision makers at different levels across the government to help them inform legislative proposals. So that was one of the very first things that we did as CJSAC that had a direct impact on the criminal justice system and gave people information that they needed to perform their decision-making functions. Next slide, please. Sorry. And then within the analysis, we also reached out to our administrative office of the courts. They have a lot of data on juveniles as they deal with the front end of the system with the juveniles. They have more data because not every juvenile that goes into the court system is actually moved over to DJJ, only a certain amount. And so we had them run some of the numbers as well. And in this case for House Bill 3 with the detentions, it looked like it was going to be about 400 additional youth. We've seen some of that, but not all of that. And some of that just depends on the way crimes are charged and work through that. But their estimates were pretty accurate. And we've been able to use that in a capacity management model within the department. For 162, we kind of talked about that with the separations, and just to highlight that point is everything has to be separate. And so that required us to kind of look at the physical structures and the physical plant of everything to make sure that we could meet those needs. And so we've been able to continuously update the data and look at data to do that. Next slide, please. And then with House Bill 3, the major impact there was the automatic detention. And so there was probably potentially some adjustment in the charges as they worked their way through the system. And that's, we saw that as a benefit is the law enforcement working with the court designated worker, working with the judges in that process. So the law was there that said that these youth have to be detained if they're charged certain ways. And so working through that process, we did see an increase in violent felony offenses. Detentions, but we did not make it all the way to the 400 in there, which when you do the math, that's about one additional youth detained per day. It's a little over that, obviously, but it roughly kind of works out that way. One of the biggest parts of that bill as well was that was an improvement is the violent felony offenses as they come through. All of those youth get a violent felony assessment. And for that, we use a MAISY 2 and a structured interview process. We're moving to the PADI 5 in the future here, and that's overseen by a qualified mental health professional. So a licensed psychologist or anyone in that field that meets the legal requirements for that. And we also keep data on that as well. Next slide. Okay, so the general observations we saw there is the intake. That's with the detention, that's very transitory, and it depends on the season that you're in, if you will, as far as how long folks are detained. But all of our youth are seen within 48 hours outside of holidays, and so the ones that that don't meet criteria for detention are, as advocated for and moved out of the system and have other options beyond secure detention. For the other ones, with some of the increased violent crimes, some of those obviously are detained and remain in the system longer. Many of these things are difficult to predict, and data helps, but data over time, as this bill is implemented, we'll know more about it. But there are a lot of decisions that are made at local levels based on specific sets of circumstances. And so those are not easy to quantify all those variables and run predictive model without a larger set of data. And so the Administrative Office of Courts collects data as well as we collect data. And as we move to our juvenile Kentucky offender management system, we'll be able to collect and use the data more easily, as well as once our data warehouse comes online. So we're very excited about that future possibility.
Wonderful. So our second project that we'll be discussing is a study that we did in coordination with two of our SJS grants. And so for this project, given that at the time it was Elsie and I were the only two staff members in our CJSAC, we did partner with an outside organization in order to be able to conduct a two-phase study on our DJJ data systems. And so we worked with the Center for Justice Innovation to be able to accomplish this. And so this study occurred in two phases. Phase one, what data relating to juvenile detention does Kentucky policy stipulate that DJJ must collect? And then also, how can DJJ's juvenile detention electronic data collection system and supporting infrastructure be enhanced to ensure quality data? And then phase two of the study is looking at DJJ's data exchange policies with justice stakeholders. As Elsie highlighted when we were doing the analysis of House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 162, a lot of our systems within the justice or a lot of our data systems within the justice system, are very homegrown systems. They are systems that had been developed 10 or 15 years ago. And, I think as all of us know, if you don't continue to improve and invest in some of those data systems, it becomes very outdated very quickly. And so when we were, doing the analysis for the effects of those two pieces of legislation, it became very evident about what the limitations of those data systems are. Just in terms of, the data that we collect, in terms of the data that we're able to export from the system, and how different systems talk to one another. And so for this study, it was very beneficial for us to be able to bring in an outside partner to be able to look at this and basically audit our data systems, give a thorough picture of, what is available to us, what is being done, what are our systems capable of, are we meeting, the state requirements and federal requirements for that data, but even going as far as saying, this is what our system is capable of, but what is the actual use of the system? How are people inputting the data? How are people, collecting information? How are they making sure it's standardized? I briefly looked at the chat, so one of the questions, but it was just talking about, how are we looking at the accuracy of that information? And with our old system, that was a large challenge. And I think it's something that is being corrected in our new system. But having this study done and conducted with those partners, it was very evident. The opportunity, I like to phrase this as opportunities for us to be able to improve some of these systems. So for this study, we worked with CJI in partnership with our Statistical Analysis Center. So we reviewed DJJ data practices to form our data system and do an exchange assessment. This is really looking at where we are as our SAC about building capacity, assessing, those opportunities for improving the system, so that once we reach these main stages, we'll be able to do a little bit more in the research space. And so that team, they also reviewed relevant statutes, policies, procedures, existing data systems, and best practices. They ended up working with a total of 36 local stakeholders. And so that included, our Department of Corrections, Department of Juvenile Justice, court systems, local jail systems, looking at it from the administrative point of view as well, looking at from some of our legal point of views and some of our legal staff. So a pretty thorough assessment of, what our system is capable of. They conducted listening sessions, administered surveys to local partners. It was very beneficial, I think, to have people, boots on the ground and seeing about how they interacted with the system, because I think sometimes at our level, we lose sight of how people are really using what's available to them versus, how it was designed or how we might think that they use it. This study came out with a lot of it reinforced a lot of thoughts I think that we already had about the system. And so, it showed that, DJJ was being very intentional about how they were using their data. They're, making their best efforts to be thorough in that information collection, and organizing it and updating it on a regular basis. However, it did become evident that, there were severe limitations to the system, to the point that, duplication of records, inconsistency to be able to even match records between the same juvenile, and just challenges of, especially with the data export, because when we would, export data, there would be a lot of cleaning that was needed on a very manual basis in order to have usable information. And so that's part of the reason why, our analysis of those two pieces of legislation took 6 weeks is because the output was very limited on what we were able to actually pull from the system. It also reinforced the information that these systems were not built to talk to one another, and so we were not able to receive medical information very well. We were not able to receive court data very well. And, at that point, the system that we had, the language used to build it, we were limited even by that because we were only able to update things so much. We were only limited on what APIs we were able to build in order to exchange that data. And so I think it was a very helpful practice in order to get that outside perspective to be able to inform some of our goals as it relates to our new offender management system.
So I'll talk about our new offender management system. We had existing in the state what we call the Kentucky Offender Management System for our adults. That offender management system does all adult prisoners, including prisoners that Kentucky is one of the states that houses certain prison or certain crimes, C&D felonies in local jails. So they have records of all of those folks, as well as they do probation and parole. They do full service on the correction side, but they also provide support administratively to the parole board. And so the parole board performs all of its functions in JCOMS as well, or I'm sorry, in the COMS system, the adult version of the system. So as we looked at all of the things that we would need, that was one of the factors we evaluated, was how would we be consistent with the back end of the system, if you will, when you look at post disposition, post conviction. And so we reached out to the vendor that provides the services to Kentucky for the offender management system, and had some discussions with them, and they were able to provide us an opportunity to basically build a system with them from the current system, because we have that prison function, we have that halfway house function, we have that probation and parole function within DJJ. We just had to figure out the alternatives to secure detention and the jail function, if you will, the detention function. And so we worked with them on that, and proceeded to purchase against that master agreement. Next slide, please. Okay. And so our first purchase from a federal funding standpoint was, we actually had COVID funding open and available. We had an opportunity there as it was getting ready to close out, that we had not expended everything. This opportunity arose. And so we wrote everything up, got quotes, submitted a draft of the contract, did everything, and we were received approval to use some of the COVID funding. And so our initial purchase was made with $775,000 from that purchase. And those items right there that you see in there are the modules within the COM system, the JCOM system that we bought. And as you can see, it deals with a lot of things that actually show up on the Maryland slide there, risk and need assessment. There's quite a few different things there that we bought. And so that was just our initial purchase to get started. We knew we would need more funding. And so right about that time frame, the Bipartisan Communities Act had been passed, and it had adjusted the NCHIP into both an NCHIP grant, but also an NCHIP supplemental. And so when that came out, there was specific language in there about juvenile record keeping systems, and the ability to make some of their records more available if allowed under your state law. And so working through that process, Drew and I wrote another grant proposal. In that case, we requested $1.477 million to provide all those modules that are listed under there. And so we were able to get those. That was approved, and we were able to get those, and we've purchased all those modules. And we are currently in the process between the first two of implementing what we call phase 1 and phase 2, which phase 1 is our detention function. So there are 20 systems / applications within DJJ. There are 4 main ones, and the 4 main ones are the ones that Drew is talking about in the previous study that we went through and studied. How would we replace those and what the needs were? And so we used that study to help us in this purchase and to kind of guide our actions in some of that. And so our phase 1 will replace the detention booking system. So that's one of the 4. And then our phase 2, detention booking system and what we call an alternative to detention system. So it'll replace 2 of the big 4. And then our phase 2 is our electronic health record, which will replace our medical system. So sometime by the end of the year, we'll replace 3 of our 4 major systems. So we'll have 1 remaining that deals with probation, parole, and our youth development center function. And although those will still exist, there are significant portions of them that we've already developed in the JCOM system, as well as the implementation of phase 2, knocking out the medical portion. So we're we will be about halfway through our system, we think, here by the end of the year. And that's a pretty significant achievement for us, given where we started in the 2023 timeframe. So we've been going pretty quickly on that, and we've seen good result. Next slide, please. Okay. And then our most recent grant was under InChip again. We asked for $3.96 million and we received that. And that was centered on those, I think it's 5 modules that are in there. And when you look at the entire module, the setting that was available to us, there's about 44 available. We will have purchased about 40 of those 44 by the time we're done. Some of those have been combined in different versioning, but we'll have essentially a complete system that will integrate with our Department of Corrections and our parole board. And then the remainder of the funding, we focused on our development and modifications that we would need to make in the system. And so one of our next big builds is our classification system, so that we have a classification system for our public offenders, as well as our youthful offenders who are going to be treated as adults, and that those classification systems meet all the standards we're required to have, as well as for the youthful offender system, that it's consistent with standards that the Department of Corrections uses as well. Let's see if there's anything else on there. Nope, that looks to be about it. Okay, next slide.
Our final project that we're actively working on is our DJJ data warehouse. And so this is a project that is similar to actually what currently exists within our Department of Corrections system. And so they have an external data warehouse in which they back up the information from the offender management system, and they're able to do increased capacity for experts of information, manipulate data, provide and develop dashboards. And so looking, it will improve our capacity to be able to analyze DJJ data. And so we're currently in the contracting phase for building out that data warehouse. Very excited that JCOMS has developed to a point that we're able to complete this step. I'm very excited for this. And so this is sort of where our next focus is as we continue to build out JCOMS and continue with the data exports and analysis. Perfect. So, perfect timing. So that is the end of our presentation, and we have some time for questions.
That's great. Boy, that was fascinating to see how you have those 4 different efforts underway that have really fed into and reinforced each other, and that combined you're going to end up with really a terrific data system that's really going to help you make decisions. I actually want to start this question and answer by asking if the Maryland and the Kentucky teams have questions for each other, because you're both struggling with how do we get the complete data picture? How do we pull together what the policymakers need to make these big decisions? So what would you ask each other about your experiences and struggles, or what's working?
Well, I would like the Juvenile Justice Project study, the process mapping, and the detention assessment tool right off the bat, because you all run detention and not every state runs detention. So we're constantly looking at how everyone does detention and how we could do that better, because the detention for us is the front door, and then everything else is kind of downstream from that. So we're trying to make sure that our initial process or initial interaction with youth benefits youth, in the most positive way, approaches least restrictive alternatives on the front end, provides local law enforcement, provides county attorneys, Commonwealth attorneys, and judges all the information that they need before they have to make that difficult decision to potentially, restrict someone's freedom into a secure detention facility, which is and effectively operates as a jail. And that's a very tough experience for a young person. So we're always looking for any other perspective and resource.
All right, Jeffrey or Brianna, do you have any questions for Kentucky about what they're doing?
I don't really have anything. Just, fascinating work, how we're trying to solve, a similar or answer similar questions, and how there's certain things that are alike and different with how the states have data. It's just interesting to hear, your perspective.
My thought was that, oh, sorry, Andrew. Oh, I was just going to say, we can definitely put you in touch with DJS. All of that information about the flow chart and the use of their risk assessment instrument, that all comes from our Department of Juvenile Services. So if there was any kind of conversation that could take place between you guys, if that'd be beneficial, we would be happy to connect you. And when I was seeing your presentation, also great presentation, I was just thinking about, we have a juvenile compliance officer in our state, and I just think she would really be interested in this. I'd want to share it with her afterwards.
I was just going to add that I'm excited to see your all's dashboards, because we're just getting into the dashboard space and about to start to make our dashboards publicly available. And so I've really admired the work that you all have done with that. So I'm sure once we get to the point that our juvenile data will be available for dashboards, I'll be asking you all many questions.
Congratulations on getting in the dashboard space. Can't wait to see that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the kind words. One thing that I forgot to mention during Brianna's presentation on the front of dashboards is that we have two different laws where we're required to track juveniles, charges, adults data. We do have a public facing dashboard on juveniles, charges, adults that comes from our Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, which actually manages the criminal history data. And unfortunately, the data that we have does not actually capture individual youth. It's only capturing the number of charges. So that we've had that dashboard public for 5 years, but I feel like once we finally get the court's data, that's really going to provide a more complete picture on the actual number of distinct youth that are being charged as an adult and all of the processes associated with that. But we can provide a link to that, since that is related to this topic.
All right, we had a couple questions come up in chat, and these were actually triggered by the Maryland presentation, but Kentucky, you may be able to answer these too. The first is, are either of you collecting background information on the juveniles being detained versus released?
In terms of background information, that's not something that we're getting from Department of Juvenile Services. We have demographic information, background, if any, could be like if there's previous complaints that we have records of, but what we're really hoping to get any kind of like background or unjustice related data for those is with the data source we're trying to get from the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, which would give us access to, hopefully, link them with either social services records and or education records to get more of a clear picture about other aspects of their lives.
Great, thank you. That question came from Stephanie. And then Chris Henning in Wisconsin is wondering how you all are dealing with the issue where one system may have a slightly different name or birth date, and then another says, how do you link people when you have not got clean or high quality data across systems?
So in one way, only having data from one source so far works in our favor. We don't have any problems there. But also, we don't have names from the Department of Juvenile Services. We have like an ID number. It's not the same as like the state ID that we would have from the criminal justice system. So that is part of what we're going to need to be working with the Administrative Office of the Courts when we receive their data, that we have something consistent that can be viewed across different systems without a name. The ID should be more objective and reliable, but we haven't run into it as a problem yet. But thank you for the questions.
All right. Kentucky, you all are really in an enviable situation where the SAC director then moves to another agency that houses data, right? So now the SAC has someone who really gets them. But then, Elsie, once you got to the Department of Juvenile Justice, what were you surprised to learn about what was or wasn't possible that you had thought maybe you could do?
Well, so we kind of knew it before we went there, which was that the systems, and I'm sure most agencies that went through this is, if you think back to the late 90s, the Paper Reduction Act created most of the government-owned, government-operated IT systems.
Mhm.
And that was a good thing, but there was not, we did, Moore's Law kicks in eventually, and, the development of technology outpaces government. And so we did not have a divestiture plan of the government-owned, government-operated to get into a commercial platform so that we would be more interoperable. And so this is our first venture into a fully maintained, built, supported commercial platform. It's CJIS certified, so it meets all the requirements for criminal justice entities. It's got a EHR that's certified by HHS in it. So I mean, it's a full package for us. But this was our first venture into that, and so I knew when we went down there that the data would not work well together because they had to build disparate systems to satisfy the functional needs of the different elements of the department. So probation parole has a system, the detention system has a system, the medical system has a system. And because of the way they were built, they don't really talk to each other. They can, but it's not always great. And as, for lack of a better term, as bit rot has occurred over the years, just the failing of the systems is, so we knew that that was a reality we were facing, but we also knew that we were coming in with a new system that we could subsume most. We thought we would only get the big four, but we found that there's enough functionality in the platform that we can essentially probably consume all 20 systems. And so the only IT systems that will remain afterwards are going to be local systems that deal with like purchase requests and travel and administration. All of the other remaining systems will be subsumed into this enterprise IT system where we have a identification number that a juvenile will get and it will always be the same. And while we haven't built it yet, Drew and I are working on it, and we've been talking about this for a little while, is getting that criminal justice ID number that goes across the entirety of the criminal justice system so that the data links at every point. Because everybody's got their own ID number, but how do you connect those ID numbers to different people and not duplicate those? And so that's one of the things CJSAC is statutorily charged with, is getting that part of it sorted out. And so as Drew builds this out and we all kind of build our IT system, that's something that we've been kind of kept in mind, is so that we build into the larger vision for criminal justice data, so that we're not just building another one-off. And our connection to DOC and the parole board helps us out. Additionally, our court system is moving to a commercial platform. So now they're willing to talk about APIs because they had a government-owned, government-operated system. So when they were referencing the 36 stakeholders, almost everybody we talked to said, we will share the data with you. We expect you to share the data with us to the limit of the law, because everybody wants to know, they need to know this information in order to make the proper decision. And so that's been very exciting. I thought we might meet more resistance, but most agencies are ready to share the data that they're legally allowed to. And so that's been a very exciting development, I think, as we went through the process.
Well, these are two really exciting projects, and I feel like we should already go ahead and book you all for next year to see what progress you make. I'll leave that to Jason to get in touch. Any final thoughts before we close out?
The only thing I would offer, and Drew and I had this conversation many times, is we looked at some of the stuff when it came out, like COVID, and we even looked at the NCHIP one, and we're kind of like, well, will they consider this? Will they fund this? And kind of what we got to was, we had a body of law, we had a body of policy, we had a need, and there was this funding. And while it did not always fit exactly into the parameters of the grant, if you write it up and you have those conversations and provide that supporting detail, we found that the grant making agencies were very willing to consider novel or unique approaches with that. And so had we not asked for this, we might still be waiting on funding for a system, just because different priorities and how the budgets work, and no state has an infinite amount of money. Whereas we were able to kind of fast track this system because we were able to jump on some new fast moving grants that had expanded capacity, but didn't exactly fit what we were doing, but it fit well enough that the grant making agencies were willing to consider it. And so I think Drew did a great job. He was the principal drafter for most of the things we wrote. He did a great job kind of conveying and laying out the narrative. But, we got to that point where we just thought, well, we should just ask. And if they say no, they say no. But if they fund some or all of it, we'll at least be moving forward. And so we're very thankful for the grant making agencies, the DOJ one specifically, because they did review it, they did take the time with it, and they did fund us.
That's great and very encouraging to hear. Jeffrey, anything from y'all?
I don't know that I have anything else. I mean, I think we covered it all. Please use us as a resource if you're thinking of, doing a project of this nature, doing with juvenile data. I know that there's different laws in different states and different agencies, but we're happy to be a resource, and hopefully we'll have more to share next year. We'd be happy to present again if you will have us, Susan.
That's great. Okay, I don't have the ability to have you both share your final screen with your contact information. So go ahead and drop that contact information in chat so people right now can go ahead and grab that. And everyone else, I want you, while you're looking in chat for that contact information, to see the link to the survey for today's feedback survey. It's really important to us. It's really short. Really important to us that you take that short feedback survey so we know what you liked about today's events, how we can plan better events in the future, and what you got out of it. And please, we hope to see you all back tomorrow. We've had a great series of panels today and another great series coming tomorrow. Tell your friends if you think somebody else ought to join us. And we will see you all back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Join me finally in thanking this terrific panel for closing out our session today. Thanks so much.